There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon. This is episode number 160. And today on the show, we are joined by Brian Call of the Gritty Bowmen podcast. And we discuss Brian's lessons learned from applying whitetail tactics to blacktail hunting, his first whitetail bow hunt, and most interesting, the importance of mental toughness when hunting. And in particular, our conversation around this topic, mental toughness, which we get to late in the episode, I think is absolutely killer. Do not miss it. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today we've got a fun episode. We've got a kind of a widely diverse episode because in a little while here we're going to be joined by Brian Call of the Gritty Bowmen. And this conversation happened actually a couple weeks back while I was in Montana for that Sitka Gear Converge event that we talked about. And me and Brian got to talk about a whole slew of different things. Kind of interestingly, Brian listened to the Wired Hunt podcast a lot and was able to take the information he heard us talking about when it comes to whitetails and apply that to his blacktail hunting in Oregon. So we talk about that. We talk about his first whitetail hunt in Alabama. And then we get into some really interesting stuff related to mental toughness and the mental side of hunting. And that's probably my favorite part of this whole conversation that we're going to listen to here in a second. So some good stuff. But Dan wasn't there with us. Obviously, I was there just for this event. But Dan is with us now to catch up on some stuff. And there's lots for us to catch up on, right, Dan?
That's a fact, Jack.
You've been a busy man.
Well, at least a day and a half I was.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Before we get to that busy stuff, I wanna share a little bit of an update with our audience about something coming up and a change to something that's coming up. I've talked a couple times in the podcast about the fact that I'm going to be speaking at the Quality Deer Management National Convention coming up, right? We've talked about this a little bit. Well, the plan was for us to do a live podcast recording down there. And I've been running through a couple different ideas of how we might be able to do that. But finally, I was like, you know what? To do this right, I just have to somehow get my 9-fingered co-host down to New Orleans somehow. So I had to bribe your wife. I paid thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for your wife to allow you to leave the house.
Right.
And you're going to be joining me on the stage for the live recording of our podcast with a special guest. I'm not going to talk about who that guest is going to be, but there will be a third person with us, and he's someone I've wanted to have on the podcast for years. Someone who I think is a really interesting hunter, and we're going to have some really great stuff to talk about, but you will be there rocking the stage with me, and I'm pumped about that, man.
How many people are going to how many people are we going to be in front of?
I'm guessing there might be 5 people that are interested in hearing us.
Okay.
At max, there might be 5 people.
Okay. I don't know. I heard like 200, but if it's only 5, yeah, I mean, at that point, it's just like talking to the mounts in my office.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to be a big draw, but 3 to 5 people might be interested.
Right.
I have no idea. I mean,
I talked with Ben Harshine of Huntera Maps the other day, and he told me that this isn't like the ATA show. This is the age group here, like the 55 and older crowd, and guys like us are, and I'm even 10 years older than you, but we're the minority.
Well, I say that's a little bit dramatic. It's definitely not just 55 and over. I've been to the national convention before. It's a diverse crew.
Okay.
But there's certainly, I think it's fair to say maybe it skews a little bit towards a more mature group. But I think there'll be people that are interested. I'm excited, and you know what we're going to be talking about, and I've touched on this a little bit, but really it's all going to be about expanding your horizons as a deer hunter. It's something we talk about a lot here. I'm particularly passionate about just going to new places, trying new things, and I think in particular, I think a lot of the guys that are practicing quality deer management, like really practicing it, some of these guys, they own land or they've got a lease and they're managing it and they're putting in habitat improvements and they're doing great stuff, like awesome stuff. They're great deer hunters. I really enjoy that type of deer hunting too. But I think you sometimes get locked into doing the same thing and you only do that one thing. And I think you miss out a little bit when you don't try new ways of hunting, new experiences in hunting. So my hope with this is that, you know, and this is something we talk about in the podcast a lot, so this isn't anything new for our audience, but I hope that we can kind of inspire a few folks, maybe just one person, that, hey, you know what, I do want to try something different once, and you know what, I think it's possible, given what these guys had to say. That's my hope. So we're going to talk about how to pull off these trips, how to have that kind of experience, how to get outside of your comfort zone. And I don't know, I just love going to new places, trying new things, and I think we'll be able to pepper our guests with some questions, and I'm going to share a lot of my experiences, and you've done some of this, and you can share some thoughts on that. And if nothing else, just you're going to look very pretty up there on the stage, Dan, so I think that's key.
I tell you what, you know, the reason I did a podcast and not like a web show is because of probably of my face. I have a face for radio.
Yes, that's what they say. Yeah, it's gonna be fun though. I'm looking forward to it. And I was like, you know what? If there's anyone that's gonna be there that wants to be part of a live Wired Hunt podcast, they're gonna want the real deal. They're gonna want that real experience, and that's you and me, buddy. That's you and me doing what we're doing.
I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And I haven't even told you about this, but I kind of am volunteering you to do something. And you can tell me if you're not up for this. But
well, is there nudity?
It's quite possible. Depends on how the night goes.
Oh boy.
But I was thinking it'd be really cool. You know, I'm sure there's gonna be some people down there for this big event that have followed the Wired Hunt podcast and might be interested in you know, just hanging out with other Wired Hunt podcast listeners. And I was thinking, you know, the events that day, Friday, July 21st, when we'll be doing our live podcast, the events that day end at like 7 o'clock, so there's no like official events the rest of the evening. I was like, you know, it would be really cool to do like a Wired to Hunt meetup. Anyone down there who'd like to get together with some fellow whitetail nuts and you and me and our guest, we're gonna pick a location like 8 o'clock Friday night, and if you're interested, stop on by whatever bar or restaurant we're at and have a drink with us, say hi, talk about the podcast, anything on your mind, and we'll just have a hangout. A bunch of us get together and have a good time.
A meet and greet.
A meet and greet. What do you think?
Okay. I like the idea, but what time does my flight leave Saturday morning?
It is early the next morning.
Oh boy. So I'm going to have to behave myself.
You will. This will be Dan Johnson light.
Yeah. No hard alcohol.
Exactly. That might be a good idea anyways though. So
right.
This is like a forced filter on what you do. So that'll be fun, right?
Right, absolutely.
So,
it's going to be cool. I'd like to meet some of the other guys, you know, some of the people who listen to this and maybe put a name with a face.
Exactly. So we're doing our live podcast recording at the National Convention, which is down in New Orleans, and we are doing this at 9:45 a.m. on Friday, July 21st. So if this podcast is coming out, this podcast is basically coming out just a week before we'll be speaking down there. So if you're already going down there, if you live close by, you can still sign up for the convention. You can get a day pass if you want, or show up for multiple days. It is really a tremendous event. There is an amazing set of speakers and resources and seminars and things going on there. It really is a great event. I've been several times. It's always great, and we'd love to see you there this time with us there. So Friday, July 21st in the morning for the speaking, and then tentatively 8 p.m. meetup that night. I do not have a location picked out yet, but I'm going to be sharing that on the Wired Hunt Twitter account, Instagram, and Facebook as we get closer. So just make sure you're following Wired Hunt on social media and check that on Friday, and we'll make sure to give that location. So anyone out there who wants to hang out, we'd love to see you on Friday. So that's the game plan, Dan. And let's talk deer, though, right?
Let's talk deer.
So tell me.
I got one question for you before we get started.
Okay.
Have you checked your cameras on your Michigan farm yet?
I've not checked cameras.
Okay.
So
you don't know if Holyfield is walking around anywhere?
I know nothing.
Okay.
All I know, I did get a little interesting tidbit. A person I know that lives near this property, sort of a friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine, her husband told her that he has been seeing a really big buck in this bean field, and he claims like 2 feet tall, the rack.
Yeah.
And she called me and said, hey, if you might want to come and check out this field because there's this really big buck that's been coming out. So I just heard about that a couple nights ago. I just got home from Missouri, so I haven't had a chance to go check it out yet, but I'm going to be heading out tonight probably to go scope this area out and see if this happens to be my man. So
wow.
I'm excited.
That'd be crazy.
But yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited that he could be around, or any nice buck like that could be around. So it's that time of year. I'm just pumped to see some big velvet bucks.
Awesome. I checked my trail cams, man. And I finally got a day and a half to where I could go do some actual work. And kind of a long story short, I'm looking at a little map right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stands prepped and ready to hunt in my traditional rut spots.
Nice.
For the upcoming season. And I checked 3 trail cameras while I was out there. One I didn't get to because it's way far back of the farm. I'll let it soak just a little bit longer. Added another camera to a mineral location that I didn't have one on before, and then walked out of the timber with poison ivy and a lot of sweat. So but the good thing is I got the work done, and that's what's most important.
That is awesome. I love when we get to be able to talk about this stuff. Like I love the trail camera pulls. I love the summer projects, moving stands and everything. Like this is the chess match. A lot of it's happening right now.
Right.
That it's just a matter of then executing on it, or just playing it out, letting the pieces fall where they may in November. Right now we're setting the stage. So this is it. Tell me, what are these new stands you hung, or were these just like trimming out and prepping current stands? Yeah.
So I have of those 5, 2 of them had stands in the tree from the previous year. So the only thing I had to do was put the sticks up, loosen up the strap, make sure it was safe, do an inspection on it, cut like a handful of branches out of the shooting lanes. So basically it was just maintenance. And the other 3 were full blown trim outs. And I would say out of the 8.5, 9 hours I was outside doing work on Saturday, I'd say about 6 or 7 hours were put into those 3 stand locations.
Yeah, that's the real work right there.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about these locations, or one of these locations? Like why'd you set up there? What's going to make these spots so good, and when are you going to hunt them?
Right. Okay. So as you know, kid coming late September. So my October, early season probably just isn't going to happen unless I'm hunting around home somewhere. But these stand locations are historically good pinch points, right? I've had tree stands in there before, but not in these trees. So, I mean, you still have to go and do a complete trim out.
Yep.
One is over a very popular fence crossing that is in between the corner of a pasture and a creek with a really steep bank. So the deer aren't going up and down it. They're moving through that area. The other one is another pinch point, kind of where one random year I set a trail camera down in this little crossing, and I got every mature buck on the property on this one little area.
Wow.
So I think I told you this a little bit before, but there is a small ridge that is in between two bigger ridges. It's shorter than it's in the middle. So imagine the ridge is looking like a W, right? With the middle one being shorter.
Okay. Yep.
So I had to set up on the far left part of the W but still get a shot into this pinch point because my deer lab was showing that like 80% of the movement going through that pinch point was happening on a northwest wind.
Okay.
So if I was really close to actually in the pinch point on a northwest wind, my wind would be blowing over the middle ridge and where I'd sat in the past, blowing up into a bedding area. Right. So I knew that I have to hunt this on a northwest wind. I have to have a stand in there for a northwest wind. So I had to move to the west just a little bit more, so that when on a northwest wind, my scent is blowing up the left side of the small ridge and not going over the ridge into the bedding area and blowing out into this pasture.
I follow.
So yeah. So just like basically a really strategic move on stand location, 50 yards away from where I was the previous year. And then it's crazy. This is what I've noticed, that my tree stand locations in the past couple of years are less about a area and more about a specific trail. Right. And and micromanaging those stand locations so much that you can get your access route into these stand locations to the point where you're not getting busted. You have the advantage from the time you walk in to the time you get to the stand. And then through historic either trail camera pictures or intel from the stand, you know what trail these deer are using. So the two pinch point stands, I'm literally hunting one, maybe two shooting lanes on the same exact trail. So, I mean, I set these stands up at 15 yards, 20 yards shots, and just really hoping that on the correct winds, I'm getting play, from those trails.
That's exciting. I love how stuff we talk about so much, trying to fine tune our sets. We always talk about we need to take that extra effort to go and make those small adjustments. And I like the fact that it sounds like you've done that here.
Yeah. So, and I got the third full blown trim out was down in near a bedding area, right? So previously I hunted on a southwest south wind down in this bedding area, because if I have anything north, it tends to ride this creek ridge, this creek line and a field edge, and deer move up and down it all the time. So because I'm going to be using different access routes to this area, like walking through creeks this year, I needed a place to hunt on a north wind as well. So I have another stand that I walked down there, and I full-blown trim out was probably 15 yards to 20 yards away from the stand that was – so I have two stands within 20 yards of each other.
Is the old stand still there?
Yep. I left it there. And
now, would you ever hunt that with a different wind direction or something?
Yeah, I have that stand there for a south wind,
Okay.
and then the one I just trimmed out is for a northwest north wind.
Gotcha. Cool.
So, yep. So it's going to be one of those things where, depending on the wind, I'm going to hunt the same area, but I'm using a different access route and a different stand.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's like, I feel like that used to be one of those things earlier in my like hunting time where I was like, oh, that seems stupid to have two stands right in the same area or on the same food source or the same whatever. But the more and more I learn and experience, like that's one of those little pro tips. Like, yes, having just the right angle with a certain wind direction is worth having two different setups in a certain area. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So then I also did I don't know if this has ever happened to you, and I'm sure it has. You walk into an area, and I have this area. It's kind of a bedding area, and I'm so anal now about where I'm setting in what tree that I'm setting my stands in that I walked into this area and I said, okay, northwest wind. Okay, I'm gonna go to this. I'm going to go to this tree and set it up. But if it's a little out of the north, this wouldn't work. Okay, so I can't do that tree. So I ended up walking into this area and then walking right back out of it after about 30 minutes of walking around it, basically scouting, because it's going to be one of those areas where even the smallest directional wind change is going to result in me having to hunt out of a different tree in that area. So there's no point of pre-hanging a set in there unless I was hanging like 6 sets.
Yeah.
And I don't have that many tree stands. So that area is going to be a run and gun set specifically. There's not going, because every change in wind direction is going to result in a different area of this point of a ridge / bedding area that I'm going to have to hunt in.
Yeah. Did you trim any like lanes out just in like preparation for having a couple spots to throw a tree stand in on the running gun, or no?
Nope. The only thing that I did was I cut down a small tree that was in between kind of a four tree area that had the possibility to know, okay, I'm going to cut this tree down and it's going to lead to me if having to trim one less shooting lane when I go in there for my running gun.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
So you got a good set, a good plan set in place. Now, how many more trips do you plan on going in here to make adjustments, or are you done? Are you set with this farm?
If I do anything, there's going to be 1, potentially 2 more stands that I'm going to be hanging. And that will be a one-time deal when I go in, and because I still have some trail cameras I need to hang yet. But it's going to be 1, potentially 2, and it's going to be on the exact same ridge, right? And they're going to be probably, again, 20 yards apart from each other, maybe less. One on one side of the ridge, on the let's say this ridge runs west to east, and I'm going to have one on the south side and one on the north side for different wind directions. And I'll be able to be honest with you, I'll be able to cut one shooting lane that would lead right from one stand to the next.
Nice.
So other than that potential one, and it's been an area that I've hunted before, so I know my way in and out very well. I know the access route in and out, and the only thing I have to do is just set the stand up, do some trimming, but it's pretty tight in there. So if there is any trimming, it's going to be very minimal. And yeah, I mean, it'll probably, to be honest with you, it'll probably be a run and gun. So the next time I go to my farm, it's going to be strictly a trail camera check / add new cameras. And then the next time I go in is going to be one of the last weeks in August, the first weekend in September. And it's going to be that transition where I take them off the mineral stations and I put them on pinch points, inside corners, fence crossings, whatnot.
It's pretty crazy. Season's coming fast.
Oh man.
So we got to hear about that trail camera pull though before we shut this down, Dan. How did the trail cameras cards look?
I tell you what, I was pretty happy with what I found. I'll be honest, better than last year. As far as a maturity level, I think I was looking at maybe 4 deer that may make 4 or older, with one buck maybe being 7 or 8.
Wow.
I'm gonna have to go back and check some of the old cameras or the old trail cam pics that I have of this buck, but it's a buck I've named Dork. He shows up this time of year every year for the past 4 or 5 years, and he's always had a huge body. This year, his body, to be honest with you, looks a little smaller. I mean, he looks healthy, but his antlers, he's all mass. He's real tight. He's always been in kind of I think he's been a 10-pointer, but just really tall brows, lots of mass, and just a buck that I would love to run into some year. And I don't know, man. Other than that, I got a buck that I may have some history with. I posted some pictures on Facebook and Instagram of him. My buddy Ryan seems to think it's a buck that he actually hit in the antler.
Oh, that buck?
Yeah, he seems to think it might be him. I've been really digging through pictures to look for a notch on his ear, but this year all the pictures of him none of them are straight on, so you can't see his ear if it's got a notch out of it at all. But it is a mature buck. I would think that buck was 2014, 15, 16. So that's like if that buck was a 4 or 5 year old, that'd put him at roughly an 8-year-old this year. So if it is him, maybe. If not, it's a descendant of him. Really, really cagey, really big 10-pointer. Don't know what he'll make. He may make Booner, but there's still a lot of season left. But I tell you what, this mild winter, definitely for Iowa, definitely going into this year, I'm seeing healthier bodied bucks, and I'm seeing bigger antler development.
That's awesome. Now, how's the rain situation been down by your property? Because I was just talking with Mark Drury down in the south part of the state, and he's been really worried about drought where his properties are. Are you seeing that too?
Yep. Until it went June 2nd was the last time we got rain down on the main farm. I spoke with the landowner this year, but then I texted another guy in the area yesterday, and they got 2 inches of rain. Okay. So my farm got 2 inches of rain. I mean, the crops were looking pretty bad. The beans were real short. Typically this year, they're at least halfway up the leg, or just a little bit below the knee. And the corn leaves were starting to roll in on each other, and that's typical of no water and hot weather. But we got 2 inches, and hopefully some of that absorbed into the ground and got the crops where they needed to. Got the, because when you get this drought, then you start worrying about EHD.
Exactly.
Yep. So I'm just thankful that we did get the rain that we got.
Well, that's good, dude. Well, hopefully no disease issues over by you, and I'm glad to hear you got some good ones on camera. And next week when we do a podcast, I should have some updates for you on some trail camera stuff. And we don't have time to talk about it now, but next time we'll talk about, I've been doing some public land scouting and found some interesting stuff there, and continue to work on my private properties here in Michigan. So, man, the pieces are coming together.
Yep. It's that snowball, and it's just going to start, the train, the locomotive is starting to gain its momentum, right? And here pretty soon it's just going to be, hold on.
It's a wild time of year coming up, and I'm pumped. Pumped.
I'll see you in New Orleans.
I will see you in New Orleans. I can't wait, buddy. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I hope I'll see a lot of you guys in New Orleans as well. Now, before we move on to our conversation with Brian, we do need to pause briefly for our Sitka story of the day. And producer Spencer Newharth has got that queued up for us next.
For this week's Sitka story, we're joined by Dan Ness, a Sitka ambassador and elk guide, who tells us about his role in the harvest of a monster public land bull.
So elk hunting in southwest Colorado, I was guiding my 2 hunters from Texas that I've been guiding for a few years, glassing a big, huge meadow. And right at last light, saw an elk appear at the way far end of the meadow, about 600, 700 yards away. Pick up my glasses, and sure enough, it's a really nice bull. So I say, big bull, we got to go. Close the distance, losing light, get to about 470, 500 yards roughly. And I look at my hunter and I say, are you confident in this shot? And he says, absolutely. So get him set up, and I say, send it. That bullet goes, and hear that bullet hit the elk, and that elk takes off and disappears in the brush, and kind of looking at each other. And, we think the shot was good, but we weren't 100% confident on it. So we decided to back up for the evening and just let the bull be in peace and come back in the morning. Well, we came back in the morning, and sure enough, thunderstorm had rolled in, complete downpour. So all the blood was washed away, and just took our time and worked through the pinions where we last saw him, and found some tracks, and kind of saw a beam of light shining through the trees. And sure enough, there he was. And we ended up finding him. And I look over at my hunter, I'm like, there he is, man. And celebrated like crazy. And for a public land hunt over the counter, that bull ended up scoring 368, and it was one of the most incredible hunts of my life.
On Dan's Colorado elk hunt, he was wearing Sitka's Timberline pants and Stratus jacket. If you'd like to create a Sitka story of your own, or to learn more about Sitka's technical hunting apparel, visit sitkagear.com.
So we are in Bozeman, Montana. It is the Sitka Converge event, and I'm here with podcast extraordinaire Brian Call. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Absolutely.
I've been a big fan of Wired to Hunt for a long time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's so cool seeing someone who reached out to me a long time as a listener of the Wired to Hunt podcast saying, hey, you got a decent thing going on, and then go and show me up and do something so much better. It's awesome. So congrats, man.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I heard you on a podcast about business, starting your own business.
Okay. Is that Phil?
I think so.
Phil's podcast? Phil Havens?
Yes.
Bow Hunting Freedom podcast. Does that ring a bell?
It was like how to start. He
That's
interviewed.
What it was.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think that's what he calls it, and it's all about getting into the bow hunting industry.
So this is like 3 years ago
or
more. And so yeah, I heard you on the podcast, and you were talking about starting Wired to Hunt. It was what I loved about it was 100% all you. There was no, you weren't partnered up with some company. They weren't paying you to do a show. It was you ran and you made all the decisions all on your own, and you built it all the way up from scratch, and it was very much digital based.
Yeah.
And so I heard you on the show talking about it and stuff, and then you said, yeah, anybody who wants to just reach out and, ask me questions. So I sent you an email, and I had started down this path of I had bought a computer, figured out how to do a bunch of editing on the computer, shoot some video. I was kind of self-teaching myself for like 6 or 7 months, and I had got a film ready, and I was going to put it in full draw film tour. And I just kind of was playing around with stuff on my own, but I was thinking about starting a podcast for the Western side of hunting. And so I reached out, and you got back to me, but it was like 4 months after I sent the email.
If it makes you feel any better, that's kind of the norm for everybody. I'm so horrible with email.
And I'm worse than you, because there are people who have emailed me. There's just too many to get back to.
Yeah.
It was very cool when I did get a message, back from you, and we went back and forth a few times. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait for you. I had to go on without you. And
I'm glad you did. So for those who aren't familiar, tell us what you ended up doing. Okay. Talk about Gritty.
Yeah. So I started the Gritty Bowmen podcast, Gritty Bowmen brand. I graduated from BYU with a degree in accounting and information systems, and I went into business, and I was kind of doing IT consulting and governance and compliance work as a consultant, and then I went into work for Standard Insurance Company for 8 or 9 years. And in the midst of that, I've always been into entrepreneur stuff. I had a construction company. I did a lot of stuff on the side. I did a lot of things that I failed at.
Don't we all?
And then I decided I was going to start making personal hunting films, just stuff for me and buddies. And I started to learn how to edit and film. And one thing led to another. I really wanted to make something I thought would be cool out of a hunt. We had whatever the hunt is. Each year we'd film some stuff and we'd just put it out there and share it.
Yeah.
And there was no goal to like start a business or to do anything with it. And then over time, I started having friends come up to me. How do you set up your bow, and how do you hunt, and what do you do? And I found myself explaining things to people. What do you eat? I'm big into diet and fitness, and so I was explaining that. And I thought, I should just do a podcast, even if only friends of mine and family and other people nerd out on it. Yeah. That's cool. And so I kind of just did it as a hobby and for fun. And I did the filmmaking and the podcast. I ran into Aaron Snyder, who works for Kafaru International, part owner there, and followed Aaron for years doing backpack hunting. I'd always read his gear reviews, and I'd go buy all the crap he said to go buy, and then I'd go hunt. And so I met Aaron one day and at the Sportsman Show in Oregon, and I said, "Hey, you want to do a podcast?" He's like, "Do you do podcasts?" I'm like, "Well, I will tomorrow." Do you want to do it? And he's like, "Yeah." So he was my first guest. We sat down and we just kind of
talk about fate.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We sat down and we just chatted it up, and I learned a lot of things. I had so many questions for the guy, like floorless shelter, boots, and backpacks. How do you adjust it? How do you load it? And stuff that. And I had been doing fairly well on my own backpack hunting. We'd gone into Eagle Caps a couple of times and gone on some pretty deep and remote hikes and hunts. But this is a guy who spent his life doing it, and this is me doing it when I get vacation time. And I geeked out on it, but I was nowhere near Snyder's level. And so it just took off. Conversation was great. I published it, and then I got all these emails asking for another one. And so I did more. And after about a month, Aaron Snyder called me up and he said, "Hey, how'd that podcast go?" And I said, it was really good. That episode did well. And he's like, "Do you want to do another one?" And I said, "Yeah, if you'll do another one." And so we did another one, and same thing happened. More people liked it, and we did another one, and pretty soon we just started doing one every week. And it went from, I don't know, it just went from a few people following and just exponentially grew.
Yeah, snowballing.
Yeah. So that sort of surprised me at first, and I had to make a decision. Do I keep putting content out and keep doing this, or because it's starting to cut into my day job?
Right.
Like, I already had a good job that paid me well. So what do you do? And it got to a point where I had enough partners and companies who liked what we were doing that came to us and said, "Hey, what's it going to take so you can do this full time?"
Yeah.
And we talked about it, and it took us a while, and I was fascinated by your story on how you made the jump and went all in with Wired to Hunt and the process, and I followed that closely, and I kind of took other people's advice who'd done the same. And at some point, I just jumped.
You got to take a leap, right?
I think if you have something you're passionate about and you want to do, it didn't come without cost. I mean, I gave up a lot of things to do it,
sure.
But I gained a lot of things, and I don't regret it. And I'm really excited about where it might lead down the road.
I always get such a kick out of seeing people chase that passion and be willing to obviously put in the work, but then also step out on a limb a little bit because it is outside of the norm. It is different than the safety and security, and there's nothing wrong with that type of job. There's nothing wrong with it at all. But for some people, if you know that deep down inside of you, that's not what fulfills you and is not going to fill you with life and excitement and passion, and it's something else, to then have the gall to go for it, I really respect and get excited to see that. So it's been neat to be able to see you take that leap and do it smashingly well.
I appreciate that. I've had a lot of support along the way, and Aaron Snyder has been, we're it hasn't been a partnership without problems, right? Like
Everything.
But Aaron's like a brother now, and there's just very few people that I enjoy spending time with as much as Aaron, and I think that comes out on the podcast.
Yeah.
And that matters to people.
That's good.
So
that's perfect. So, real quick, if you had to give like the 15-second spiel of what Gritty Bowmen is for those listening, what are they going to get? What are they going to learn? What should they come to expect if they're not already within your world?
We are an outdoor, like a backpacking, backcountry bow hunting podcast primarily. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, but we talk, I've never put rules around our topics. So we've talked about everything. It's really a life podcast to me. So we talk about everything from entrepreneurship and business to fitness and diet and exercise to hunting.
Yeah. I thought that was cool. You guys did like a business book podcast.
Yeah.
I was like, he reads the same stuff I do.
Yeah. We've been, that's been a huge hit. It's been some of our highest downloaded episodes.
Isn't that interesting?
Have been podcasts about life books.
Right.
Like Extreme Ownership.
Yeah.
And Ego is the
Jocko.
Enemy.
Ryan Holiday.
Those have been, yes.
Great stuff.
And so I'm pretty excited about, all of it's been great, but I've received a ton of emails where people are like, I love to hear you talk about hunting. I love to hear you and Aaron just hang out.
Yeah.
But I love to hear you talk about life more. And so that's been
cool.
Sort of a thing for me where we haven't done a lot of episodes around that, but you look at Joe Rogan, he's a good friend, and he goes out and does shows on whatever he feels like. And I feel like that's what Gritty can do.
Yeah,
like,
that's cool.
It's mine, right? So I can do it on whatever I want, so.
Why not?
Yeah.
Well, can I talk about whatever I want then on this one? Because what I want to talk on this one right now is about what brought you to listen to Wired to Hunt originally, as I understand it.
Yes.
You told me that you started listening to Wired to Hunt because you were a blacktail hunter out in the far Pacific Northwest, and you were finding that the whitetail stuff we were talking about somehow was relevant to you. So explain that. That really intrigued me to hear that what we were talking about in Michigan or the South or the East could be applicable to a totally different kind of subspecies in Oregon.
Right. So I grew up kind of in that western Oregon airspace, just in Oregon City, south of Portland. It's a pretty urban area. There's, it's all private land, 5-acre lots here and there and so forth. And then it gets a little denser in some places, but there's deer running around the neighborhood just like whitetail back east, right? Midwest.
Yeah.
But the blacktail in the city, the only difference really is they're very nocturnal, like extremely, insanely nocturnal. Where I think whitetail are a little more, except when they get to be, it's from what I can understand, like when they get to be monsters, a lot of them don't come out till after dark. They figured it out, right? There's
a reason why they got to be big and old.
Right. And I figured that out with blacktail were the same, and I had to decide. I was trying to figure out how to hunt them. And it's interesting because I did a film called, I don't remember my own film, Trophy Places.
Okay.
I think is what it's called. And I did a blacktail film, and it was on Solo Hunters. Tim put it on Solo Hunter.
I didn't see that.
That episode is up there on Solo Hunter TV. You can watch it on his channel, YouTube, or my website. But what happened was, and it kind of documents that story. But what happened is, I grew up on this acreage in the middle of nowhere in Oregon, and we had about 40 acres, and then the neighbors all had acreage, and I never saw a buck the whole time growing up. Like, there's like nothing with horns, like spikes, here and there. And I'd see does, and I knew there were deer there, but I just never registered.
Right.
And my dad, we'd all go back east, and we'd to the east side of Oregon, and we'd hunt mule deer and elk. It was just like what we did every season. What I didn't realize was there were monster deer right in my backyard.
Really?
And so game cameras are invented, right? And people are using those, and I get a game camera. I remember talking to a friend of mine who I went to his house one day, and we hadn't talked much since high school. Go over to his house, and I looked, and this is years later, right after high school, and he's got these beautiful blacktail bucks mounted on his wall. I'm like, whoa, those are just amazing, you know? They're kind of small, you know, but they're amazing.
Super
and he's
cool
like,
looking.
They're giant. I'm like, well, they're kind of small. I mean, a lot of the deer I see aren't that small. And he's like, it's not a mule deer. It's a blacktail, you know? And it had never really been on my radar.
Wow.
And so at that point, I started paying attention, and they're big deer. On his wall, I started to realize the difference between a blacktail, Colombian blacktail, and like a whitetail and a mule deer, and really paying attention. And then I wanted to hunt them. And we had all that acreage. It was ours, so we hung game cameras up all over them. Aunt and uncle's place, my place, and for like a year I didn't see any bucks, nothing. And then right when the rut was coming around, all of a sudden I started seeing bucks. And I remember seeing them it was like 11 months. Like we had put those cameras up like around December, and I didn't see any deer with antlers.
Wow.
And I still haven't figured out the place. And all I know is that from like the last week of October through Thanksgiving, anything can happen.
Interesting. Just like whitetails.
Yep. And that they're the bucks, there's some that I think live right there, and I think there are some that, wander in from far away.
Yeah.
But what I learned from your podcast is, so I started to correlate that, man, it seems like the things that you're talking about in whitetail country would apply. And we had done some tree stand hunting in some mountain areas, and it's like, it's not like there are blacktail around that you can hunt up in the mountains that act a lot more like, I would think, like a Kansas whitetail. And you walk out and you rattle some antlers and stuff, and they're come charging in and stuff like that. And so I I had done that, but I knew they were at my house.
Yeah.
And I was like, here I'm up in the Cascades and the mountains, and I'm over by Mount Hood, and I'm trying to hunt these blacktails versus in the city, more or less. I mean, where there's these big bucks running around, I see them on camera at night. So I started listening to your podcast and started taking bits and pieces from it. And it was really neat to take parts like scent control. It's just not something a lot of guys on the West really paid attention to.
Right.
Putting on some rubber boots. I mean, this is all basic stuff for your listeners, but for me, it was like revolutionary, right?
That's so interesting.
And so, a lot of guys that hunted blacktails, at least where I grew up, they walked. They still hunted. That's how they did it. And they would walk around on the ground, and even rattling, they didn't do a lot of it, And there were guys who were killing big blacktails, and I was reading their books as well. But I found that I really enjoyed listening to your podcast and taking those tactics back into the woods. So where to hang up cameras, I started to figure out what staging areas were.
Yeah.
You started to kind of open my eyes to deer behavior.
Yeah.
QDM, and we started putting apple trees and different things out on our property. We logged some things and kind of tried to mimic what it would be like to have a better property. So it's mine. Nobody else can come on it. So I wanted to make it so it was my own little paradise of deer activity.
Right.
And so I started building my land to kind of suit that. And it took about 6 years. And the deer, right now, it's been 3 years. I listened to it 3 years since then. And since I really hunted that area, and man, there's some good bucks running around now that weren't there before. And really, I think what it is we just attract a lot of does to the property, which then brings those bucks in during the rut. And I'm just about hunting over does during the rut. That's all I got.
So are you just setting up near like doe bedding areas and that kind of thing? And waiting for them to cruise through, or
Yes.
and you're able to identify that kind of stuff similar to what we do in the whitetail world, like where the does are bedding. I mean, I'm sure you kind of know.
Yep.
Some general areas.
I kind of know where they're bedded, and I know where they go to feed,
You know.
and I don't think we have the deer densities like what you guys have.
Sure.
But and blacktail definitely have a certain personality and characteristic about them that make them, I think, different, quite a bit different from a
So
whitetail.
what is that?
Good question.
But before we get to that, we're going to take a quick break for our weekly whitetail wisdom from our friends at Whitetail Properties. And my good buddy from South Dakota, producer Spencer Newharth, will take it from here.
This week with Whitetail Properties, we are joined by Tom James, a land specialist out of central Indiana. And Tom is going to be telling us about what to look for when your goal is to flip a property.
Okay, great question. Well, first and foremost, looking at a good county in your state, or even a good part of the county that is known for producing better quality deer, and that's typically easily found out in the state's record book program. So those counties are typically more highly sought after by buyers, as opposed to maybe counties that are off out of that parameter. So number one, a good county. Maybe even a better part of the county that is known for producing better deer. Secondly, I would look for property that you can pick up right at market value, and slightly under market value obviously is a home run. But make sure you do your homework, find out what the comps and local land is selling for in that mixed recreational ground, and that would be timber and maybe some pasture, some tillable ground mixed in. So number two, good value at the current market price. And number three, look at sometimes an often overlooked aspect of timber that people don't know a lot about is the quality of the hardwood species that are on the property. If you can find 18-inch and larger diameter trees in there, specifically white oaks, red oaks, walnut, cherry, sugar maple, the white oak market is extremely hot right now, and anything above that is going to that size range is going to return dividends that you could use applying to paying the property back off, and also doing some great habitat work in the process by opening up the canopy and getting some good habitat work going on in there.
If you'd like to learn more and to see the properties that Tom currently has listed for sale, visit whitetailproperties.com/James. That's JAMES.
So
Okay.
we are in a very different place than we were 2 seconds ago, Brian. Because
Right.
a second ago, you and me were talking, and it was nice and quiet, and we were talking about blacktails versus whitetails. And now it's windy, and there's guns being shot behind us. What happened?
Well, we're at the Sitka Converge event here in Montana, and I had to step out from the podcast for another obligation, and now we're back at it. But now we're out on range day.
Yeah, it's day 2 of Converge.
Yep.
We're in Paradise Valley.
Sitka Converge. Did I say conversion? Converge?
I think Converge.
Yeah.
I think you had it.
Yeah.
How nice is it out here, though?
It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's very nice.
This whole state is incredible. You know,
I 100% agree with that.
No offense. I'm going to throw this out there, though. Whenever I'm out here, I wonder, how come those guys on the east don't move out west?
Yeah, I know. You're telling me. You are telling me.
What-
My wife and
what's
I,
keeping them there exactly?
every time we come out here, my wife and I have that conversation.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of fun stuff there, and
It really
good
is.
people,
Yeah,
and
oh, yeah.
family and friends. But, we keep on getting closer and closer. I mean, we spend about 3 months a year out here now.
Yeah.
So we're getting there. But those whitetails,
Yes.
they do kind of have my heart. And
Oh, dude.
yeah,
The heart.
yeah.
I mean, it sounds kind of among my family and friends that I left back in Oregon. The blacktail hunting is sorely missed.
Yeah.
And I kind of want the whole maybe increased level of mule deer and access to mule deer and big mule deer and elk hunting in Colorado to sort of, be a salve on the wound of not hunting blacktails. But they're so different. I still miss the blacktail. It doesn't make up for it. You know.
How's that move been?
It's been really good. Colorado is kind of the perfect mix of everything for us, and because I'm doing Gritty Bowmen full time, I can kind of live wherever I want to live.
Yep.
And in the past, you know, I commuted into a major metropolitan area for years, so I kind of needed to live near a city that was big, and you know, it kind of, like most people, I didn't have the ability to live in a remote area of the United States in the country, you know, as much as I do now. So
Right.
I chose Evergreen, Colorado, and it's an awesome place. It's not for everybody because, you know, it's a commute if you're working in Denver area. It's a commute. It's a good drive.
How long a drive is it?
Oh, probably 45 minutes if
Okay.
the traffic's good.
Do you feel like you're a little outside of the chaos of Denver though?
Oh yeah. No, I'm in the mountains. It's like this.
That's awesome.
It's like where we're at right now.
That
So,
is. I'm jealous.
yeah, it's new for me. The weather is the reason I left the Northwest.
Too rainy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be out in the sun a lot more. So yeah.
I've heard very good things about that area.
Yeah.
Good weather, great access to lots of country, and
Lots of backpacking and hiking. And Aaron's there and Kafari was there, and we do so much together that
it's nice to have that.
yeah, it's just a great place for us to work together and do things. So
we were just talking about blacktails and how you were able to pull some whitetail info from
yes.
listen to what we were talking about with our whitetail hunting back in the day, and you were applying that to blacktails. But just recently, this winter, you went and chased whitetails for the first time. Was that the first time?
Yes, it was the first time.
So I want to hear about that. How did that go?
So, okay, so
And Aaron went too, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
Aaron and I went to Alabama,
Nope.
and our friend Brian Broderick, he lives down there in Alabama, and he if you look him up on Instagram, he's Lost Arrow Films, and he's a really, really cool dude, and he has some access to land back there, his land that where it's only only a few people get to come on it each year. They manage it. They're careful. They kill a bunch of does, but they try not to kill any bucks. So it's a managed property, right? So you're spoiled when you're walking in there because it's different than a lot of other places.
Yeah. How big is it? Is it a lot of property?
Gosh, I don't know. It's large. I mean, I think it took us in a buggy. It took us like 30 minutes to cross the whole thing. You know,
So yeah, pretty big.
yeah. So they just have a few people that hunted, and so we went out there. Well, the interesting thing about it was it's February where we went, and so Alabama has a February rut hunt, and it's hard for me to picture those critters in the rut in February.
Isn't that
by
weird?
then, everybody else is kind of, all the other deer are done,
Oh yeah.
you know, and this pocket in Alabama is like ramping up. They're going nuts.
Bizarre.
So we showed up there, and I hunted whitetails once years and years ago in Idaho, and during the rut in Idaho, and back then, maybe 12 years ago, 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of. I mean, it was sort of like whitetails were just kind of booming in that area. But anyway, it wasn't like hunting them like how I pictured hunting whitetails. I didn't see that many.
Were you tree stand hunting them or like
Yeah,
stalking
we
around?
did. We did a little
Okay.
both, you know. But we went out. So we go to Alabama, and the deer there are. So the thing that stood out to me, right, was the sheer number of deer is crazy. Like there's just so many whitetails, and they're like rabbits. They just run everywhere. There's just does, fawns, some bucks, and this is granted it's during the rut on a piece of property that's not heavily pressured. And where they select just a few bucks a year off of it. So it was a special place, especially for Brian. He grew up there.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's cool.
Yeah, so we went out and we the deer. So whitetail are jumpy, like
True story.
skittish, jumpy. Like it's not like blacktail at all. We would climb into the tree stand, and a blacktail, you could almost maybe it's just because the hunting pressure is a lot different there. I mean, obviously that's part of it. The way the whitetail kind of get jumpy, looking up. They looked up a lot, like they were scanning the trees. You do not get that with blacktail. They almost never look up. You can get away with a lot of movement.
And I guess maybe just not a lot of people are tree stand hunting.
Yes,
in the blacktail range.
I would agree
accurate?
with that, and I would just think that there's not a lot of people hunting that species in general. So there's a lower deer density, and then there's fewer hunters.
Okay.
So, for whatever reason, but one thing I will say is that blacktail do not behave the same, I think, regardless. The way a blacktail moves is in general, this is a broad generalization. I mean, from my experience, okay, in an urban center, the blacktail will take 2 or 3 steps and stop and just stand for a long time. And then it'll eat a little bit and it'll just stand and look. And it'll take a few steps and it's very calm. It's like chill, and it's just it's on high alert, but it's not jumpy at all. It's not flinching. It's not ducking its head. It's not jerking his head around. Like, was there something behind me? It doesn't have like a complex.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
like some of the deer I see.
Yeah, like these whitetail were like crack addicts.
So the head's popping.
The head's popping up. They're jerking up. They're looking around. They're looking behind them.
Yeah.
They're jumping. Everybody's got everybody on edge.
Edge.
One's turning left. One's turning right. And it's like, what did you see? I don't know. What did you see? And and then they're looking up in the tree, and that kind of spastic, intense activity was very different than what you see with the blacktail. So the blacktail will stand there, and they'll move. And then when they hear something, they literally will just stop and freeze. And they'll look in the direction, but they won't move. They'll sit there, and they'll sit there sometimes what seems like eternity, and they'll just be frozen. And they will let a predator or they will just stand there while something walks by them. Never giving away their position, never running. They'll just sit there and be a statue. Where a whitetail, what I observed, like I'm in a tree stand, and Aaron or somebody would come walking up through the woods to come and get me toward the end of our afternoon hunt, and that whitetail would jerk its head up, see something coming, and book it.
Yeah.
And a blacktail in the same situation in general would freeze and just kind of wait for that person to walk by without being seen. And sometimes it will take a few steps, and when they leave, they tend to they sneak off. They just kind of sneak off, and they hide behind a tree, and they don't run the same way. And so they're a very cautious deer, and they tend to, if something does come in, they have all their trails. From what I understand with a lot of blacktails, especially in the small urban centers where I was at, they kind of live and reside in a 300-yard area.
Wow.
For most of the year.
So really small range.
So very, very small. So they don't really have a need, especially old bucks, to go very far. They get up, they eat, they drink a little, and it's right there. There's so much abundant growth and food and stuff for these bucks that they don't have to really roam much. And from some of the studies I've heard, they won't go very far at all. Whereas, and I'm talking about the Willamette Valley, I'm talking about coastal blacktail, a little more so than I am talking about maybe Northern California or further eastward, where they're kind of edge bucks mixed with mule deer genetics and stuff like that.
So how do blacktails, the coastal blacktails that you were hunting, compare with something like a Sitka blacktail?
So I've hunted Sitka blacktail on Prince of Wales Island a few times, and a couple of times. And I've been to Prince of Wales bear hunting in the spring, and I've seen, when I'm not hunting blacktails, so I've seen them a bit and studied them some. I would say there's a lot of similarities. The older bucks, I think, on the Sitka bucks are, I don't know, they're very they kind of move a lot the same. Like They check their trail. They move a little slower, but I would say that the Sitka blacktail are less. They'll move out faster, from my experience. It's kind of hard to say because Sitka blacktail, where I was at, some of them I think have never even seen a human.
Right. Very different that way.
In that sense, they didn't. It's hard to observe their behavior because they're like, oh, they're very curious, and so they just stare at you, and you stare at them, and they don't run away. It's odd. So,
because they just don't know what.
Yeah, behaviorally, I don't know that I can talk about Sitka blacktail as much. I hear they're very aggressive during the rut, but so are Columbian blacktail. A lot of people think that you can't rattle them in or that they don't respond like a whitetail. And I've seen some knockdown, drag out, brutal blacktail fights. And
really?
Cameron Haynes has a couple of videos on his blacktail film that he made a few years back. He has some footage he got from somebody where two blacktails were going at each other. They try to kill each other.
Wow.
I've seen some blacktails just go after each other.
That's something, any species, when you see that, that's pretty wild.
Their faces are in the dirt, and they're just they're trying to kill each other. So the other thing that I noticed with back to the whitetail thing is their bodies are so, at least this is Alabama, right?
Right.
So they're slight. Like they jump and they move kind of, when a whitetail doe, especially when it runs, it sort of bounces back and forth, and the front legs land in a different spot than the back legs.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
I do.
It's just a very bouncy kind of thing. And blacktail does move like mule deer. They move a lot more like a mule deer. Whitetail are their own thing, man. They don't look like anything mule deer or blacktail. So blacktail are stocky, a little shorter. They don't have the biggest set of antlers, but they still have a stout neck and stout shoulders, and they can still be a stocky animal. Sitka blacktail, same thing. They're very stocky and boxy looking. They're thick.
They just look cool. Like
do.
I see these deer in those dark foreheads, and especially I feel like whenever I see a Sitka blacktail hunt, it's raining, so those antlers are glistening and kind of orangey browny.
I've shot a number of blacktail bucks with red antlers.
It's so cool.
Bright, like red, because of the trees that they're rubbing on, right? So it kind of taints and colors their antlers in a dark brown red color, and they have a double throat patch often,
nice,
where they got the two white patches, and then they're coloring. I honestly think, and I love mule deer and I love whitetail, and it's sort of, for me, it's like a pretty woman is a pretty woman, whether she's black, white, Asian. A pretty girl is a pretty girl.
Fair enough.
A beautiful deer is a beautiful deer, regardless of whether it's blacktail, mule deer, or whitetail. But for me, I feel like blacktail, Columbian blacktail, are the prettiest of them all for me. Their ears, the way that they're set, the stockiness of it, the coloring of their coat, the white patches, the black top cap, and it just all the coloring, and just the ears in proportion to the antlers and stuff. I just think they're a beautiful animal.
Yeah.
If you're getting a Columbian blacktail and you're just mounting the antlers, you missed out, because the beauty really, to me, is in the shoulder mount, the shape of the body, the head, the ears, all that kind of stuff. It's amazing.
So you noticed a whole lot of differences between these whitetails and blacktails, and some similarities, but was it fun?
Yeah, I mean,
was it as fun?
The whitetail scene is, so back to their behavior. A blacktail, generally, most of the time, especially in these city centers, they don't come out until dark. I mean, they're so nocturnal. Honestly, I might get, for all the photos I get, and I'll hang like 8 or 9 cameras on my land, and I would have pictures of bucks, the same ones every year that I'd see every year, and then there would be bucks that I saw once and never saw again.
Yeah.
Which I think is common across the United States, right?
Yep.
But what would happen would be 9 out of, like, for every buck I saw in the dark, if I got 10 bucks in the dark, I'd see 1 in the daylight.
Yeah.
And there were bucks that, with all my cameras that were up, there were bucks that I would see once every other year on a camera during daylight hours. So you're saying you're like I would hunt 14 days in a row on these different spots for a glimpse at one mature buck, one. And there would be years where I didn't see a single one.
A marathon with very small rewards.
You're just out there. We joke around, it's like a unicorn.
Yeah.
You're looking for a unicorn. And I remember Scout Haugen talking about blacktails. I mean, Cameron is kind of an anomaly in the sense, well, not an anomaly, but there are a lot of guys that hunt in Lane County and kind of more down in that area, Eugene, and the deer seem to move a little better during daytime. There's higher population. Some of the biggest Pope and Young bucks have been taken in that area. But up where I was at, closer to Portland, Oregon, it was pretty tough to get a deer out during daylight so a lot of guys will jump in their rig and they will drive south and they will hunt south. In Oregon, the hunt would start a week later, or earlier rather, a week to more than a week earlier down south than it does up north where I was at. It's just a different animal, dude. They just don't come out except for at night. And so you're waiting for that one glimpse. So I'm in Alabama and you contrast that. And there are bucks like just running the trees back and forth, chasing does.
Are they?
And you're seeing stuff constantly. Like there's a buck goes run here and one goes running there and it goes under your stand. And at the same time, they're looking up every now and then and scanning. So you're like vigilant where,
so they're on edge and you're on edge.
Yeah. And they're fighting. You'll hear them fighting and going at it and grunting.
Wow.
They're making very vocal. In Alabama, it was just like action, action, action. And when you sit in a blacktail stand, you're in general, that does happen. That's happened to me. I've had a couple of magic days where I come across bucks just fighting and going crazy, but then there are just days where it's dead.
Yeah.
And it's only for a 7 to 10 day window of brilliant, rut activity, and it's gone, and it's all nighttime again. Where in Alabama, it was like Broderick was telling us, as long as they don't get too spooked, as long as there's not a lot of human pressure in there, they just keep cruising around, and fighting each other, and running around and doing their thing, and the aggressiveness of them and their daytime movement is just night and day compared to what I've experienced with blacktail. So that daytime movement to me is a game changer, because you can't hunt them if they're not moving during the daytime. You can't kill them. It's not legal.
Yep.
And so
makes things a little tricky.
So that's just, and I think probably those old whitetails, they figured that out. They rut at night.
Yep.
They move at night.
Or
so
very, very, very tight to their bedrooms.
Yeah, and so you're trying to find a buck that's just maybe is in a moment of weakness and makes that mistake. And there was a buck I was after for like 5 years, and I called him Lefty, big blacktail buck, and he had this big hook off the base of his antler that just came straight out, and it was a super cool deer, and he just seemed to get bigger and bigger every year. And I missed him once. It was getting really dark. It was pretty low light, and I was chill. And I took the shot and shot right over his back. And that was the only time I got a shot at him. There were other times I could have shot at him.
Yeah.
And I have you to thank for that, because
really,
I had this difficulty trying to kill him, and I had tried everything. So I'm listening to your podcast, and I'm trying to figure out the thing is the way that I would hunt him is, this is small acreage, like 8 acres,
Real small.
Now there's other people's property right next to mine, and they liked my land. We had some apple trees and stuff like that, and I would put apples out in a couple of spots. So I knew they were feeding here, and I knew they were bedding over here. But he would show up, he would follow some does during the rut. They'd come right to where those apples were. It didn't do me any good to sit where the apples were, because the bucks wouldn't come.
They'd linger back.
They'd stay back.
Yeah.
And so the does would come in and they'd eat, and the buck would just be back there, and and every now and then I could see a glimpse of him where he'd grunt. Well, he was plenty huntable over there, that was somewhere between the bedding area and the feeding area, right? And it was kind of hard to. So I started putting cameras up right by the feeding area, and then further back, and tried to follow where he was going, try to figure out where he was coming from. And it turned out to seem pretty random, but what I figured out was there was this place where he liked to stage every night, or not every night, but often. And if I got on that tree line, he would be in that during daytime, as he would kind of sit there and wait. And as soon as it got too dark for me to shoot, he would burst out and come out and hang out. But he would not ever come out. And so I ended up moving right up to the edge of that, into that staging area, and setting up a couple of stands in there. And then I was actually seeing him move in daylight hours.
That's cool.
Where I could shoot him. I just never got a good shot.
How much fun, though, is that chess match when you're just
getting
these little details and slowly moving?
And
I live for
and
that
it
stuff.
haunts me today because he's the one buck I really wanted to get all those years.
Yeah.
And I never got it. He just disappeared, and I never saw him again. There was another buck, though, that I did shoot years later after watching him for like 3 or 4 years. 4 years. And I shot him. And it's weird how you get attached to a certain deer.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
I was actually, after I shot him, I was really bummed in a way, because it's like, now I don't get the chase is over.
Yeah. It's like the woods are a little bit emptier.
Yeah, for sure. I experienced a sense of loss by that, you know. And it's not like I have, where I was at, there was a ton of deer, you know. And that's one thing I learned early on is with those blacktail bucks, if you shoot like a resident deer that's kind of hanging out in your 5-8 acres, right? And he's 2 years old or something. It's going to take a while to get another buck to take his place, because those other bucks, they don't move that much.
Yeah.
So
they're not finding this new empty spot, you're saying.
Exactly. They're kind of like, well, this is the spot I grew up, and I like it just fine. Why would I leave? And their personalities are such that they seem to just stay. And so even though you've now shot a couple of bucks, and now there's this space for him to move into for feed and shelter and, you know, something like that, they don't seem to take advantage of it unless they're born there. So I didn't see a lot of territorial, we'd hang cameras up all over our friends' properties, and Anthony was a big blacktail killer, and you know, I'm sure other people had other experiences, but in Oregon City where I was at, it was kind of the common thing. And so certain areas, though, were really hot with bucks and some not. And my particular area just seemed to, for whatever reason, didn't have a lot of shelter and stuff or something for the big bucks. But they would come there during the rut. And so I had to work with what I owned and what I could hunt, you know. And I hunted over does. That was my strategy. Yeah.
Smart.
Find the does, and then when they come in heat, the game was on. Yeah. And at any moment he or a couple other bucks could make a mistake. And what's cool, what keeps you going is you see them every day. Like every time you get your game card out and you check your 3 or 4 cameras, they're on there every time.
That is fun.
So you're like, well, he came in to the stand 20 minutes after I left.
And you get that little like bump of like excitement.
You know he's there.
A little more hope.
You know he's there.
Still there.
And so
yeah.
I found that so back to how I hunted though, I had a trail that so my friend Chris Pasqua, he owns he runs Is It September Yet?
Okay.
It's a Facebook page or group, and he's a big time white blacktail hunter, and he shot a buck he called Daddy, and it's a big deer. It was like 145 inches, I think, or something like that.
Blacktail?
Wow. Monster, just huge. And so he was on the podcast, and we talked about this a lot. And it's like, it's in a city center where this deer kind of, I mean, it's not like it's in the mountains. You know?
Isn't a big blacktail like 110?
Yeah. I mean, 145 inches is, Colin shot 149 or 50 inch buck. I mean, wow. And these are bona fide blacktails down like right there in the Willamette, like, anyway, he shoots this buck, and it's a giant. I mean, as far as blacktails go, it's a giant. And he did this same thing. Like, we would walk in and there's a trail that you could hit, and I learned this the hard way. You walk in and you have your tree stand. So I'd walk in on that trail and I would put apples down. And the same thing with Chris. He'd put apples down. A lot of guys will use apples. It's perfectly legal in Oregon, and all we're doing is, like, on a 5-acre piece, we're just trying to attract some deer into that area. Like I said, I didn't even hunt the apples most of the time because it didn't do me any good. Because when I wanted to, I could shoot a young buck, but that's not what I wanted. And the big bucks, I've yet to see a big buck eat the apples I put on the ground in like 8 years.
I feel like that's really similar to, I mean, Texas is different, but I think a lot of places where you bait, those mature bucks just don't want to come all the way into it.
No. The does do, and I think it's because they have fawns to feed, and they're more desperate. They're hungrier. They those bucks can be selfish. They can breed, and then they can just go lay down, rest, and eat all day long. Other sources, so they don't take the risk. But we would walk in about every 3 or 4 days, and it's in my backyard. So I'd walk in, drop some apples, walk out, and just a 5-gallon bucket of a few apples. And as you do that throughout, July, August, September, October, November, it's just putting a few out every other week, or as I get closer to the season, I'm trying to keep it more stocked. And there's apple orchards all over. And so there was a whole ton of apples on every piece of property surrounding me. And so you just go fill up trash cans full of apples that just are already on the ground. If I had access to hunt one of those, like a lot of guys do, I just hunt under the apple tree and I wouldn't have to drop it, So anyway, what I found was, as long as I stayed on that trail, those bucks and those deer, they didn't care. They didn't care that I came in and out all the time. And they would come right up to the apples in the trail, and the big bucks would stay in the area.
They just got used to it.
Yep.
You're going back and forth the same place, and they...
Absolutely.
Yeah. Conditioned them.
And then as soon as there's a couple times where, like, I made a shot on a deer, or I explored off trail, and that proved to be devastating, because as soon as I went off trail and left some scent in the area surrounding it, they knew it right away, and they would just start coming in at night only. We went 100% nocturnal for 2 or 3 weeks, so just go nocturnal like that.
Yikes.
And then your season's blown. So I was paranoid to leave trail ever, right? And so you get a couple of places that you get them used to, and they're okay with you as long as you're doing the same thing all the time.
Yep.
But as soon as we started going in other areas and went off trail, your season could be shot. It'd be like hosed. And so when I listened to your podcast, I was like, well, I need to find a way to, and I learned methods for rubber boots and how to do scent and how
minimize
to keep my
that
clothes.
pressure a
yeah,
little
just
bit.
to try to keep as much scent in the area out of there as possible. And but you talked about some staging areas, and so the next year I started walking into some of these areas and setting up tree stands where I thought it would where I'd get closer, and to intercept a deer on its way through a spot on the way to where the apples were. There were no apples there, but I would put a camera there, and I started to get into bucks in daylight, and it had been like 7 years where I had hunted and just hadn't been doing it right, and still it was really tough, and I never got a really good daytime opportunity. It was always still low light, but I shot a lot of really great 3 and 4 point bucks that are 3 years old, 4 years old.
Yeah.
I never really, all that time hunting blacktails, I never really, on my own land, I never really got a poke at the bucks I wanted, that I knew were there.
The real big boys.
Yep. Part of it was, it's this dilemma, right? You go in and you sit your stand 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days in a row. Now, if your camera is telling you that a mature blacktail buck will walk by your tree stand during daylight hours once in every 10 days, then you got a 1 out of 10 days chance, right?
Yeah.
But
I think I see where you're going with this.
yeah, so you got a 10% chance every time you're in that stand. Today might be one of those 10 days. So in theory, if you sat in that stand every day for 10 days, you get your chance, right? But you're stinking up the joint every time you do it. So you're in this conundrum where you're like, do I go in there and just sit it every day for 10 days, 12 days, 15 days in a row in the same spot? Or do you just gamble and go in once every 5 days and just hope it could be 5 years before you have the time in the stand where you increase those odds.
That's the trick. And I feel like on the whitetail side, the way that I've always tried to, there's no perfect answer to that, but it's okay. Think of where I have that best chance. So if you think there's the 10% best chance in this stand, and then you wait for some set of conditions, it's going to give you an increase in that. And you don't go in until you have the best set. So on the one day when you're actually going to have a 16% chance because the cold front hit, then that's your day you go in there. Or just like you said, every day you go in there, it goes from 10 to 9 to 8 to 7 to 6. So I'm like, I'd rather do 3 hunts and get 16, 13, and 10% versus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Right.
That's tough, though.
And that's tough. And that's what I started doing later on because I cared more about getting a big buck. You know, just the challenge, the unicorn that we call it. You know, I'm trying to find that unicorn in the woods. But it's a tough decision to make. But I thought what I felt like if I could go in there and keep my eyes on cameras, I started to get a feel for does in heat, right? It's hard to tell if you're looking at the same doe, right? Because they all kind of look the same.
Very tough.
But I started to get a feel for how many does were out there, and does and fawn mixtures. Like this doe has 1 fawn, this doe has 3, this doe has 2.
Yep.
And and so I kind of like, okay, there's like 3 fawns. There's 3 does with fawns. And I started to pick out, and then
little family groups.
Yeah, and then I was like, okay, so there's not a lot out there. You know, you're talking 3 does and their babies, and then a couple of big bucks and some young bucks. So the young bucks are stupid. I mean, I mean, not to discourage anyone who shoots a 3-year-old blacktail because it's still a challenge, but there's no comparison in how easy it is to kill a 3-year-old blacktail versus a 6-year-old blacktail. They're not even in the same planet universe, you know. But when I would go out there, I started to feel out the does, and then I could see them squatting a pee and running around and doing odd rutting behavior. Started to pick that out on the camera. And I had a number of cameras up. So I could walk in, check the cameras, and I started to go, well, if I don't see any rutting activity on the camera whatsoever, then I'm not going to hunt the stand. Because it didn't really pay off.
Yep.
And that's where I started to be able to spend less time. Because you sit there 8 hours, it's bad enough you got to walk in, check your camera, and walk out. But still, you're not sitting there just sort of letting scent dissipate hour after hour after hour. And I found that worked best. And so what I would do is, it was funny, I would go in like every other day and check the camera. And I'd come out. My dad and I would sit down on the living room table, and I'd go through the camera, and you're just like, you know how it is. You're like, is he there? Is he there? Is he there? What are they doing?
Just this one.
And all of a sudden, boom. Yes. She's in heat. The buck is there. It's on. And then it's like from that day on, I'd sit 3 or 4 days in a row.
Yeah.
And surely there would be action almost every time.
Yeah, waiting those conditions.
I just feel like I was so close to making it happen on so many occasions. But
that's what keeps drawing us back, though, right?
But let me ask you this. Like, you could have spent time chasing a different deer. Like, I know of other bucks that are easier to target on other property. And I could have spent my time invested in something where the buck was even bigger. Like, when I talk about Lefty being big, he's big, but he's not like a lot of blacktails.
Yeah.
You know, 130-inch blacktail, and I'm like, oh my God, it's the biggest blacktail I'd ever seen on this property where I lived and I grew up. But for me, and I did that film with Tim Burnett that went on Solo Hunter about blacktails and trophy places, what we called it. It's where I grew up. And there's something sentimental for me there. There's something of a challenge. It wasn't about the size of the deer. It was about getting it done in that place that I cherish, where I have childhood memories.
I can 100% relate. Absolutely.
So I sit there and I'm like, would I have been so much better off, you know, going up to the upper Clackamas or these other areas where we know there are giant bucks and they're a lot easier to kill. And because that's one thing I would say is I would hunt with my buddy Anthony, and we would go up in the Cascades and hunt blacktails. And the second season typically was around November 17th. And I've seen, those bucks in the area up there, those deer tend to act a little more like the whitetail in Alabama. And so it's not like an urban city center kind of place. They're not as cautious. They're not used to humans being in their space, and they're running around, they're doing things differently. And so if I hunted deer there, it was a lot different than hunting them at my house. And we went up there 4 or 5 times. And every time we got a shot, and Anthony shot 2 nice bucks up there.
Wow.
And we only went there you can count it on both hands. So it's like, why don't we go in there all the time? Right?
I know what you're saying. You have special places, especially where the memories are.
It was the chess match.
Yes.
When I went up on the mountains, it was like you'd walk in, you find a trail, there'd be snow, a foot of it maybe. You see where the deer are headed, you climb into a tree stand, and it was fun, and the deer would be running around. But it wasn't the deer that I had done reconnaissance with for 8 months. It wasn't the deer that I had like a 5-year history with. It's almost obsessively ridiculous. Like, why would you... But yeah, because you're not chasing an animal, you're not chasing what makes sense. You're in it for the fun of the chase.
And there is an interesting thing between hunting deer versus hunting a deer. And when you have an opportunity to hunt a deer and learn a deer and all that chess like we talked about, it just gets in your blood.
It does.
And I'm in a situation.
That's why I like
your
podcast too, where I listen to it like crazy, because you're talking about Jawbreaker.
Yeah, Jawbreaker.
You're talking about, I'm following and I'm relating to you as I'm thinking of the deer I've named and that I'm following, and I'm like, it was so relatable to me, and the frustrations and the challenges and the goal, trying to go after it. And when I looked around and I talked to buddies, they didn't get it because they're hunting like most Western hunters do. There's not a specific deer.
Yep.
We're not, people aren't doing it that way. And so it was fun to apply what I learned from your show to the blacktail space and to what I experienced there. And
I find that so cool.
Made a whole movie around it,
That's awesome.
So...
But then at the same time, there's also something really awesome about going to a brand new place and what are we going to find? How are we going to make it? How are we going to make it work? And a deer you never seen before shows up, and that is pretty special too.
Aaron says he's funny. He talks about whitetail, like the ones in Alabama.
He talks some crap, doesn't he?
No. He's like, look, these deer are like the ones that grew up in Chechnya. Like he's like they're you grow up in a combat zone, you act differently. Like you're always checking over your shoulder. He's like, Kansas deer, they grew up in like suburban white neighborhoods, and they're just naive. They're not warriors. They're not like warriors. They're not like. And so he was talking about.
It's a very good analogy.
Yeah, and you're hitting these kids that grew up in the hood that are always like on high alert versus a kid that grew up in a pretty soft situation. He said it's very, very different hunting an animal like that.
Yeah.
And that's what we found in some of these areas, because we've never owned a lot of land or had, really nice places to hunt like that. But Alabama, you could tell those deer get hunted.
Yeah.
Even on this land, like Broderick was talking about, he's like, hey, out here on this property, we don't put a lot of pressure on them. We try not to. But every piece of property around this place, it's hammered.
Yeah, that'll make an impact. I feel it that way all the time in Michigan too, and it changes it.
Yes.
Completely changes it.
Michigan,
very
just like
similar.
that. Yeah.
Now, that said, though, you still got it done, right?
Well, I feel like Broderick was really cool. He wanted to shoot. So Aaron Snyder and I have vastly different personalities. If people can't tell that follow the show,
Yeah, I think we picked that up.
Yeah, and yet we're like super good, close friends. Like everything, we complement each other well.
Mm-hmm.
And Aaron has no patience, So sitting in a tree stand for one is something he can do, but he does not like.
Yeah.
And sitting still in a tree stand is even worse. I don't want to sit with Aaron in tree stands. I'm like anal retentive. I get in the stand and I lean back and I am a statue.
Yeah.
I don't move a muscle. And I sit there and I can sit like that for hours and I'm geeking out the whole time.
Yep.
I don't know why. It's maybe, and I don't remember being like that when I was younger, but after chasing blacktails, you never know when one's looking at you, or when that big monster's coming. And
it seems like every time that one time you're like, I'm going to stretch my legs. Then there he is.
There it is.
You saw and he runs away.
Yep. So
exactly how it goes.
Aaron is not patient, and Aaron also can't not shoot. So
Itchy trigger finger.
Brian's like, Aaron wants to kill animals. He likes to take the shots, and he's not all that big. He's never been a big antler chaser. He'd love to shoot a big animal, but he's not in it for that reason. So long story short, he shot does, and it was funny because he'd sit the stand, does would come in, it'd be getting toward dark, and he'd be like, "It's almost dark. I'm gonna shoot that doe," and it's like it's 45 minutes till dark. Like the bucks are gonna. This is when the bucks are gonna come in, and Aaron's like, "No, I'm just gonna shoot the doe." And he shoots the doe, and of course the whole ag field just disappears and vacates, and so he did that twice, and we're only hunting like 4 days. So I'm on the other hand, I have does walking all around. I'm just I don't want to shoot the doe that's in heat that's gonna bring that buck in.
Your decoy.
Yeah, so that's my live decoy.
Yep.
And so I haven't had a lot of chances to hunt. Areas where they have whitetails of this caliber available, So I was patient. I'm like, I can shoot a doe anytime I want. I'm gonna wait until that buck comes in, and that's really the only difference. Aaron shot a couple of bucks, and
Aaron shot a couple bucks.
I mean, a couple does. Sorry,
okay, that's what I
couple
thought.
Does.
I was like, I didn't see that.
Yeah, he shot a couple does, and I think that highly impacted his. And then there was never a buck that was a shooter that came in. Lots of other bucks, but and for me it was like at the last day or second to the last day. Broderick took me into a place, and we had never used. I've never used a climber tree stand before.
Okay. Yeah.
And he had a nice alpha hang-on climber, and it was really cool. It was neat. We just kind of like snipers snuck in there, got into this spot. Got up in a tree.
Shimmy on up.
Yeah, and the wind was just right, and it was just breaking daylight. We got up in the tree. We were not up in the tree 20 minutes, and deer were just coming out of the woodwork everywhere. And it was neat because he's like, buck deer left, buck straight in front. There's a buck behind you, and nothing was a shooter. But I'm seeing all these deer, and I'm like, oh, it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
So
and earlier, there was a giant whitetail. The first day I climbed in the stand. And you know how they are when they're rutting. He never stopped.
Yeah.
Like he was within range a couple of times, but he just wouldn't. You could grunt and scream, like practically yell at the thing,
and it down.
He did not care, and he was chasing a doe, and there was no stopping him.
Yeah. He
never spooked or got out of there. He just never gave me a shot, and it happened a couple times throughout the morning. And after seeing that deer, I didn't want, you know how it is, like you see a 180-inch mule deer and all of a sudden you're ruined for the rest of the week because you can't get yourself.
He's out there.
Yeah, he's out there.
He might be 10 minutes away.
Totally.
Oh, yeah.
And so I kept passing on some other stuff, but this buck came in and he was nowhere near the same caliber, but he was a cull buck that he was like 4 years old or something, and Brian had seen him many times, and he wasn't too big a deer. He didn't look like he had the genetics that he wanted long term. And I think it's just an excuse to let me shoot it because they typically don't shoot a deer that small. Like the rule on the acreage is kind of like Dirk Durham over there, or
right.
anyway, I decided to he said green light, and so buck came down and I let it rip, and this is the thing that surprised me. I mean, didn't surprise me, but it just gave me a new respect for whitetail. I had been told by a lot of people, including Brian and Aaron, that, you know, it's better to just shoot than it is to grunt or get them to stop, and they kind of look and they freeze and they get on edge, and then they hear then the arrow goes, and I cannot believe how fast, how lightning fast they are.
Isn't that insane? He jumped the string.
He dropped like almost, I think, a foot, roughly.
I believe it.
And so he's only, I think he was 25 yards, and I put that pin, and I aimed low, just kind of low, just in case. He dropped, but I wasn't low enough, and so I'm 3 inches low, and he dropped a whole foot, and so that arrow actually hit him in the spine, and he just hit the dirt, you know. And so I put another arrow in him, and he was done like instantly. And it's it's refreshing, and not when you see an animal drop right in front of you and you don't have to track it. It's like a relief. Like he's right there. Like you did it. You're done. It's like it's just at the same time you hit something in the spine, and you're just like the whole time. You want it to be over as fast as you can. You're like, I don't like seeing this animal on the ground like that.
Yeah, the first time I ever spined a deer, it was a doe, and it was like a really painful experience for me too. I felt horrible because I spined her, she dropped, she was still moving around. Another shot, and I was freaking out. So I rushed the second shot, and that wasn't the shot that was going to end it immediately either. So then I'm panicking again, grabbed the third arrow, and you just feel, I mean, that is the absolute worst thing you want to have happen.
Yeah, it's and I feel like Aaron spined his as well. Both of them, they just dropped. And I have the film, and I had the film of the buck I shot, and he's standing there, and Broderick actually grunted. I was at full draw. I was going to kind of let him walk, but the wind was blowing straight toward the buck, a stiff wind out in front of the buck, I should say. And so another 10 yards, and he was going to hit our wind pattern. You know, he'd be downwind of us. And so we knew he was coming in close, and Broderick was like, okay, that's far enough. And I was at full draw, and I was kind of hoping for him to stop, and he just decided, well, it's better to stop him there and get him on edge than it is for him to smell us and just bolt. So he grunted, and the buck stopped, and he looked right at us, of course. And I didn't give him much time. I mean, I already had the pin pretty much settled, and I let it rip. And he, on the video, you mark it where he's standing and where he drops to, and the arrow is perfect. It's going to center punch him, and he just drops. Yep. And I couldn't believe, I mean, his legs went down, his elbows were almost on the ground. I'm like, man, that is just a fast response.
I feel it's so often. It happens so often.
And that doesn't happen, like, mule deer don't do that. You know, they can, but it's just not common. Mule deer, elk, blacktail, but those whitetail have such a fast twitch, like, speed about them that it's cool.
So what do you think? Do you want to do it again? Would you ever go on like a Midwestern whitetail hunt, see what that's all about? Has that intrigued you yet?
So I talked to Aaron about this before we even were we'd only known each other about a month or two, and I was telling him how much I enjoyed blacktail hunting, and we talked about whitetail, and he said, and the answer is yes. I think that I love the chess match. I love sitting in a tree, and I love ambush hunting.
Yeah.
I love ambush hunting. I like spot and stalk as well, and I've done a lot of that. Any hunter who's been on the west side a lot, that's what your bread and butter is. But I won't deny that finding a spot where you predict animals will come and sitting and wait, for me, that is fun. That is fun.
Yeah.
Whether that's, a thicket of bushes, a ground blind, one you made yourself or one you popped up, or a tree stand. it doesn't matter. For me, it's the sitting and the waiting and knowing that you're, and I learned this from still hunting. Like, I've still hunted blacktails a lot. Still hunting for blacktails is almost, the guys that are really good at it, they walk a foot or two and they stand still for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And they walk a foot or two and they stand still for 5 minutes. I mean, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, a long time. And it might take them an hour to get 75 yards.
Yeah.
And I've learned from hunting blacktails that I used to think I was quiet when I would sneak into the woods. So when I started walking into my stand to hunt, I would do that where I would walk in and you climb up in your tree stand. And I've tried to explain this to guys who haven't done a lot of tree stand hunting. Climb up in your stand and you sit there and you're like, man, I was so sneaky. I got in here so quietly. You're in their stand and all of a sudden you hear like this bird starts to chirp. Mm-hmm. And then another bird, and then you see like a squirrel pop out and then birds, and then the forest just
turns on.
It's going crazy and berserko, and you're like, I wasn't sneaky at all.
Yeah.
Not in the slightest. And I thought about that. I've thought about that a lot since. When I think I'm being quiet and I'm going through the trees, the animals are like ducking for cover.
Yeah, they know what's up.
They know what's up, and so they might as well have a megaphone out going, someone's coming.
Here comes Brian.
Because those deer, I've seen it happen where I'm up in my stand, and some dog or something comes out and starts kind of walking down one of the trails, and the forest just ripples like with silence until it reaches my spot. It's like they know, and the deer, they go up on edge. They may not see or hear the dog. They just saw the squirrels and the birds and everything else that went on alert or acted funny, and they ditch it. So if I'm still hunting the wrong way, that's tough, man. It's tough to like make it work. So I've learned that there's a lot of value in ambush hunting, and so I do like, even when I'm hunting elk, to go out and sit in a spot and wait for them to come to me, rather than me blunder through the trees in their living room and bump them around.
That's hard. I feel like that's hard for a lot of guys, especially out west, that are born and raised on stalking them around. It's hard to sit and wait, and it's interesting what you said about the ambush side, because a lot of people can't relate unless you haven't done it. But there is something about it's like a pre-hunt. All the work you do and thinking about that chess match and looking at maps and scouting and setting tree stands or trail cameras, that's almost the hunt. And all that, it's like this. It's in your head work. Oh. And once you get up in there, that's okay. Now let's just see if it's like hitting a dominoes. Did I line these dominoes up right? Now we're just going to tap that first one, and we're going to see what's going to happen. And watching those dominoes trickle down
till it comes together.
When that happens, that is like a tremendous feeling of satisfaction.
Yeah, I know.
It doesn't happen often, but when it does.
Aaron and I have talked about this a few times, where out west, you get the out west guys that are like those whitetail guys. It's so easy. They just walk out on a farm. They got food plots. They climb in a stand, and they just shoot the first thing that comes. It's like baiting. It's like they make it sound like it's this easy thing that anybody can do. And I'm sure there are pieces of property
there are situations like that.
Where but that is not the norm. Yep. We always think it's easier than it really is when you haven't walked in another man's shoes.
Yes.
But as soon as you climb up into a tree, and Aaron and I have talked about this, hell, if it's 50 degrees outside and you're sitting there and you don't have the right clothes, you're freezing to death in like 1 hour.
Oh, yeah.
It's all you can do to stay up in the stand. And then you guys are hunting in some weather that's just stupid, like negative 20 degrees. And
you're sitting for hours and hours and hours.
And that right there is its own level of mental toughness and mental discipline.
Yeah.
That I think a lot of Western hunters are like, dude weighs 280 pounds and can't climb up a hill, but the dude can sit in negative 30 all day long. It's a different kind of tough.
There's something there to be said about it. Yeah. It's all good, right? I mean, there's all these different types of hunting, and it's all got its own fun. And
I secretly crave, tree stand hunting.
Yeah,
it's like I love it.
Guilty pleasure.
Yeah, I like to climb up there, and part of it is because I like quiet contemplation time.
Yeah.
Time where I just sit and watch things. And that's where glassing in the West, Aaron and I do a lot of glassing too, where you just sit all day long and you just watch stuff through your binos. Cool. And that's also it's similar feeling in terms of that.
Yeah, it's funny. When I'm like talking to people that haven't gone out west or the other way around, there's two different unique, really cool things going on when it comes to like not just the hunting aspect, but like the internal aspect. So I feel like when you're whitetail hunting, just like you said, you get this opportunity, which is very rare in today's crazy modern life, to be able to sit still and not have anyone asking something of you or talking to you. You just get to sit, be still, be present, and you have time to think about stuff. You have time to unpack things that are going on in your life, or you have times to do that. So that's having time to go within yourself. Very cool. On the other side of the thing, when you're a Western hunter and you're spot and stalking, at least my experience is out west, because you're 100% fully engaged in that moment, moving through the woods, checking the wind, what's going on, why am I stalking in here? Every step you take, every action you take, you are fully 100% in that moment, thinking about the next step. So you don't think about anything. You think about nothing in the outside world except for what's the very next thing I'm going to do. So it's true. It's really interesting. They're two complete opposite sides of the coin in that way.
Yeah.
But they're the far extremes of each side. So either you are 100% in the moment or you are 100% available to go inside yourself.
Yeah.
And it's very, very cool either way.
It's like when I'm elk hunting and we're bugling and we're calling an elk and it's just run and gun from morning till dark, 4 or 5 days in a row, I haven't even thought about my kids like once. It's especially if the conditions are snowy or cold or life and death at times where we're in the mountains and it's just or it's raining hardcore. I mean, it's just a sufferfest.
Yeah.
Those times, it's all about surviving, achieving that goal. You're focused on that one thing, toughing it out, mentally staying in the game and all that. I don't think you email's not a thing. Mm-hmm. PMs, whatever messages, posting something, your kids, swim practice. Like, it's just none of it's on your radar at all. And I think it's really good to unplug from life that fully.
All right, before we move on, we are going to take one final short break for a word from our partners at the Whitetail Institute of North America. And with fall food plot season coming very quickly, producer Spencer Newharth connected with one of Whitetail Institute's food plot experts to get the lowdown on some of the best fall food plot options we can be considering this year.
This week with Whitetail Institute, we're talking to consultant John Cooner about their special blend of Imperial Whitetail beets and greens, which is designed to hold deer fall all the way through winter.
The beets and greens is a neat product. It is an all brassica product, but it's unusual in that it's a blend of multiple brassica varieties that serve a number of purposes. The main ones are that they provide together attraction and food for deer from the fall all the way into and maybe through the dead of winter. The components are sugar beets. Most folks know how attractive they are to deer when you plant them in the fall. It's got tall tine turnip in it, which is a turnip variety that the Whitetail Institute developed 6 years specifically for deer. The tall tine turnip, the foliage is for late fall through winter. It also has a kale variety in it that is unusual when compared to most kale varieties, and that it's loose-leafed. It's very attractive to deer, and it's a vegetable cultivar that does not grow in a tight head the way a cabbage does. And finally, there's the Whitetail Institute 412 radish that maximizes the attraction over the long term by adding forage and tubers for later in the year. As a secondary benefit, the product, because of the tubers produced by the radish and tall tine tubers, can actually improve this quality, especially of compacted soils, by drilling down even a couple of feet into the soil and making wide spaces that help water and air move, and any tubers that remain after winter will break down the following spring and even improve the quality of soil by adding organic matter. But the main thing is it's built for attraction of deer
all the way through fall and through the winter.
If you'd like more info on Whitetail Institute's forage products, check out whitetailinstitute.com, where they also carry some of the top supplements, attractants, and herbicides available.
I want to talk about something that I think, just based on talking with you and every time I've listened to you, and I know some of the things you recommend and do, I think this is something that you probably think about a lot too. And you touched on it right there, and I think it applies equally, in different ways, but equally to hunting out west or hunting whitetails, to be very successful at it: mental toughness. And I think mental toughness is something that doesn't get a whole lot of talk when it comes to hunting. I mean, we talk about where to hang my tree stand, or how do we find where elk bed, or how do I shoot better. All these like physical, tangible things we have to do. But if there's any quality I see in most of the really consistent, successful hunters, it's those people that have that mental toughness. I know you're a big reader, so I imagine you're tapping into some things, and I know some people that we share interest in have this. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, at a high level, do you agree with me? Is that as important as I think it is?
I think it's everything.
Yeah,
and I think I've heard this a lot. I think it'll tie to, I mean, all your success in life can be linked to self-discipline and mental toughness. And believe me, I mean, there's certain things I'm real tough in, and some things where I'm not.
Sure, we're human.
Yeah, but in general, Stephen Ranella did a podcast on Meat Eater a while back with Denver Rourke.
Didn't hear that one.
It's a great one. Yeah. I really recommend people to check that out. And he talks about this. I think that the question is that gets proposed on that podcast, and Aaron and I have debated this a few times. Is it learned or is it genetic?
Innate, yeah.
Are you born with it, or are you? I think it's both. I think there's a combination of both. I think we all have our natural inclinations regarding mental toughness or our natural abilities, physical abilities.
Yeah.
Right? I can't dunk a basketball, and so we're all varied in what we can do genetically, but we're also, and I think your mind and your capacity to be tough mentally goes with that, but we all have the ability to be shaped by circumstances as well, depending on how we decide to react to them. And I think that I absolutely believe that you can develop and hone mental toughness.
It's like a muscle.
Yep. Everybody's going to be born with it to a certain extent naturally, of course. But wherever you're at, we've already established it's a valuable commodity.
Yeah.
You want it. So why not cultivate it? So for me, I've talked about this a few times. I followed Wim Hof. He was on Joe Rogan. He's been on like a few podcasts, right? And he's the Iceman. And there's the Wim Hof method, which is a breathing method, and you get in the ice water and you freeze to death.
Sounds like fun.
The guy has a way of breathing, and so he's climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and a couple other in his shorts.
Wow.
And a pair of boots. I think he might have done it barefoot too.
Jeez.
He's done some crazy stuff. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he goes into a lot of detail there. But basically, he's done some things through his mind that are pretty fascinating. And I won't bore people with it, but it's something to look into. But he talks about finding comfort in discomfort.
Yeah.
And he tells you that happiness is actually in the struggle, in not being comfortable, in being cold when you'd rather be warm, being hungry when when you want to eat, and he talks about how the human body and psyche needs these acute stresses and needs these moments to respond to and overcome to be happy and healthy.
Sure.
Well, I don't know about you, but climbing into cold water for 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 10 minutes, the first thing you do when you climb, let's say it's 30 degrees outside and you're going to go get inside of a cold lake. How long do you think you'll stay in there, Mark?
Not very long.
Yeah, it sucks. Like the second you get in there,
it sucks.
The second you get in there, everything inside your brain is saying, "Get out, get out, get out, get out. This is awful. This is painful. This is awful. This is horrible." Everything is like, "Get out of the water." But you're like, "No, we're staying here for 5 minutes." And you do that, and then you go back and you do it again for 10 minutes.
Are you saying you've done this?
Yes. I did it
Interesting.
with my
and you're
brother.
doing this as an exercise, a mental tough. Can I mind over body?
Yes.
Can I mind over body it? And by doing that, by flexing that muscle in that way, you're able to.
It was an experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so my brother.
Proving to yourself you can do it.
My brother was born when I was about 16 years old, so we didn't grow up together.
Oh, wow.
But he got leukemia when he was like 5, something like that, and he spent a lot of time sick and playing video games. And during the time, right when he should have been getting his butt beat, he was maybe going to die from cancer. So my parents really didn't, he got away with everything.
Yeah.
Anything he wanted, he just kind of got, because maybe he's going to be dead tomorrow. You know what I mean? So during those formative years, he kind of got pretty darn spoiled. And I think there's a lot of discipline and character that he did not develop because he got spoiled. In a way, I mean, surely chemo's no picnic.
Right.
He still had to mentally
grind
adversity through it. Yeah, but it was different. Like, he didn't get disciplined in the same way the rest of us did. As he got older, he definitely admitted, I don't have a lot of mental toughness. And we were talking about this, and he wanted to develop it, and he saw the Wim Hof thing, and he's like, I'm going to do this. And this is a kid who had a hard time, like, staying enrolled in school, and setting his mind to something he'd quit after it got hard, And this was like, I'm going to do this. And I watched him over the course of 6-8 months, every day. It started out with just a few minutes in the water, and then it was 5 minutes, and then it was 10, and then it was 30.
Wow.
And he got to a point where, and he made himself do it. Every day was a struggle. It never really got easier. It always sucked for the first bit,
Right.
But then it would feel good later throughout the day that he accomplished that.
Yes.
And I think you can, through small baby steps of making yourself do things that you don't want to do, develop mental toughness. You hear Dave Ramsey talks about, he says something like, kids do what they feel like doing. Grown-ups do what they know is good for them because it's good for them. Mm-hmm. Right? My daughter's like, "Hey, Brian, Dad, I don't want to go
Brian.
on. Yeah, Dad, I don't want to go on this hike with you and Aaron." And I'm like, "You know what, honey? I know you don't want to go on this hike with me, but it's good for you." And grown-ups do things that are good for them, even though they don't want to.
Yeah.
And she's like, "I hate it when you say that." And it's like, it's true, honey. You're gonna do it because it's good for you, and you don't have the mental toughness right now to make yourself do it. So that's why you got a parent.
Yeah.
I'm here to make you take care of yourself until you're old enough to have the discipline to do that on your own. Mm-hmm. That's how I developed character. My dad's like, "You're chopping wood today." And I'm like, "I don't want to chop wood. All we do is chop wood." And he's like, "I don't care. It's good for you.
Yep.
And you're going to do it because I said so." And then later, as a grown man, I'm like, "We need wood. I'm going to go chop it." It's like, I don't know. It's maybe sounds overly simplistic, but I think that you can develop it.
I think it's, to your point, it's funny. you probably follow Jocko a little bit.
Yeah.
So Jocko Willink, there was one of his early episodes. They were talking about this. Him and Blinken, Echo.
Mm-hmm. Echo Charles.
Yeah, Echo Charles, and they're talking about mental toughness. And Echo asked Jocko, "Well, how do you do this? How do you build mental toughness?" Mm-hmm. Jocko just says, "You do it. You decide. You decide to do it, and you do it." And Echo's like, "Well, no, there's got to be more. There's got to be more." And then goes back to and says the same thing. But in the end, Echo actually had a good example of what he was doing, and I think it's a good way to go about it. And I think I apply this a little. I try to apply this in my own life. And he gave a little example of just a very simple little thing. But he said, he wanted to try to become more mentally tough because he felt like he didn't have that very much growing up. Wasn't raised in a way where he had to flex that muscle. Pushed. So he said, This has been on his mind recently. So he was in the grocery store aisle, and he had like a case of beer and something else heavy in his left hand. And he got into this line. It was a very long line, and he wanted to let that case of beer and the other heavy thing in his left hand, he wanted to put it on the ground. And he had a long ways to go, and there was like lots and lots of groceries and the lady's cart. He knew he was going to be here a long time. He wanted to set everything down. He said, took note though. He was like mentally cognizant of this opportunity. He said, "You know what? No, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to try to build mental strength. And I'm choosing right now. I'm not going to set these down, no matter how long I have to wait. I'm not setting it down, and I'm going to see if I can do it. And I'm going to do it. And it's a stupid little thing, but he did it. And then once he did it, he said, hey, that was one way I can make a mental decision to push through an uncomfortable situation I usually wouldn't want to do. And in some tiny 0.1% way, he improved his mental toughness. And I think if you go through life looking for opportunities like that and saying, like for me, I am not, I mean, I think everyone hits a wall physically when they're doing some type of exertion, but I am not some kind of G.I. Joe type dude.
Right.
But when I go on runs and stuff, I always envision at the end, I'm conked out. I can't go any further. You hit that wall, and you got 100 yards left to go or something. And every time I get that I always think in my head, this is it. This is where it's your mind. This is are you gonna kill that elk? Are you gonna get to the top of that hill?
Right.
Are you going to be able to sit in that tree stand when the big buck comes through?
Right.
Are you gonna be able to handle the cold? And you just like have to go into your head and say no. Gonna push through it. Going to overcome it. And every little time you can do that, I think it helps.
I agree. I also think that it's very good to be put in a situation where you have no choice.
Yeah.
I was just talking to David Brinker, and he was like, well, I really want to go on a solo moose hunt. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, where they drop me off for 7 days, and they come back and get you for 10 days or whatever.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's
Hardcore.
rugged. That's...
Yeah.
But he's like, I'm like, why? And he said, well, there's a certain amount of character, I think, and growth that comes from the fact that I have to make it. Like, there's nobody else there. There's no quitting. Like, Denver was talking about being in the Navy SEALs, and they're in BUDS training, and there's a bell there. And at any moment, you can walk over and ding the bell.
Yeah.
How many of those guys would have made it through the training and not ding the bell if they were in a wartime situation and it was similar drudgery, but it was
life or death?
It was life or death. Probably a lot of them would actually tough it out.
Yeah.
Right? It's the ability to quit. Like Echo Charles is holding those two things in his hand. He's like, well, I could put it down. Technically, he can put it down anytime he wants.
Yeah.
Right? But if you're in a situation where it's like, well, if you put it down, something dire is going to happen, and you find what you're really capable of. And I think that often some of the best people I've met that have this kind of resiliency, some of them were put in a situation where they were like, I had no choice. You're like, wow, you overcame. You did some stuff that was phenomenal. And they're like, yeah, and if you'd have asked me if I could have done that, I would have said no.
Right.
Never could have done that. But I had no choice, and then I found out what I was really made of. Cameron Haynes talks about running the Boston Marathon with Lance Armstrong.
Yep.
He's like, yeah, I'm running. I'm thinking I'm dying. I'm halfway through, and I'm like, I can't do this. And he gets up by Lance, and he's like, Lance, I'm dying here. I'm dying. Or he actually asked Lance, how are you feeling? And he's like, I'm effing dying, man. And so Cam was like, what? Like, if he's dying, then the way I feel, I'm dying, but he's going to keep pushing.
Right.
And so he's like, my goal was just to stay with him. And then he did a little longer, and then pretty soon he's like, no matter what, I'll die before I stop. And mentally he decided, and he made it, and he did it. And he said something about they ran the second half of the Boston Marathon faster than they ran the first half.
Wow.
And that there's only like a couple of people in history that have ever done that.
Really?
And it's him and Lance Armstrong and like a couple others.
Wow.
And so that's phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
And he thought at halfway point, he's like, there's no way I can go any faster. And if I keep this pace up, I'll never make it to the end. And he's like, I just realized at that point that we're so much more capable of things than we think we are. And I always think about that. He said Marcus Luttrell talks about how most people quit when they still have 80% left or something like that.
Yeah.
It's some crazy amount of. And so I always think about that when things are tough and it's hard and I'm mentally grinding it out. I'm trying to make it to the top of the trail. Someday I'd like to be Aaron Snyder to the top.
I've heard that's tough.
It's probably not going to happen, but I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to still keep coming at it. And the thing of it is, sometimes I'm like, how much of it is physical ability? How much is mental toughness? How much of it is Aaron is just mentally tougher than me?
Yeah.
And that haunts me, right? Like, I'm competitive. I don't like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, dig deeper, Call. Go harder. drop if you have to. And there are times where I'm climbing at 9,000 feet behind Aaron, and I literally have so little oxygen that I'm about to black out. Like I'm about to I see a little bit of stars, and I'm like, slow down a little, and then your oxygen comes back, and I resume hiking. But pushing it to that limit, I mean, I also think I'm not going to die. It's just, you might fall down, but it's not a life and death situation. I think a lot of people blow up in their mind how difficult something is. It's like, well, yes, it's hard, but you're going to be around tomorrow. Yeah. Just pain.
Yeah, I feel like that it just comes into play so many times in hunting situations, whether it be dealing with bad weather on a backcountry trip, or whether it be just dealing with 17 8-hour sits in a row where you don't see the buck you're after, and finally, damn it, I just want to sleep it. I'm not waking up before him, but you know what? That's the day that you would have seen him.
I agree. What about this? Let me ask you this, because I think this is very much tied to this whole discussion on mental toughness, this thing I'm about to talk about.
Okay.
Negativity.
Yeah.
I think that it takes an extreme level of mental toughness not to be negative.
It goes hand in hand, I agree.
That means trash talking somebody else in a negative way. That means like being a hater on the internet. All that stuff to me is mental weakness.
Yes.
It's giving into it, and usually it's rooted in ego and pride, and it's usually done to belittle someone else to make yourself feel better. When I see someone who's hating on someone else, who's trying to achieve, trying to do good things, trying to make a difference, when I see that, I'm just like, that negativity, that hate, I think it's weakness coming out of their mouth. And mentally tough people, often I think they put that in check, and they say, you know what, I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to be this positive person that does positive things. And that builds that mental toughness.
I agree. And I think 100%. And then that also applies to actually being able to execute on, how you can execute on anything, whether it be dealing with a tough situation in life, or whether it be, a social engagement, or dealing with criticism, or looking at someone else and comparing yourself and saying, oh man, he's doing really great. I wish I was doing that great. And the easy thing is to, like you said, get negative, say, well, yeah, but they got this handed to them. Or, well, yeah, but they're jerks, or whatever you want to say. But if you look at it the other way, and you maintain that positive attitude about whether it be a project you're working on, a hunt you're going on, that I think is develops a snowball effect. And if you can stay in the game, stay positive, stay mentally tough, you put yourself in a position to eventually be in the places you want to be, whether it be successful business, whether it be getting the shot,
I think positive self-talk, but positive treatment of others, they all go hand in hand, because it's so easy to give into our natural instincts to be negative and hate on someone.
Man, that's awfully prevalent in this hunting world.
Well, I think in the social media world in general, right? Like, it's so easy now to
enables it.
Be to be cruel or mean or belittling. And again, I think that serves the weaker side of us. If you want to start developing some mental toughness, don't give in to that.
Yeah.
Be positive. And you may not like something someone else produces. You may not be a fan of their exercise routine, or how they shoot a bow, or how, their comedy routine, whatever it is. But to me, it's like, you can not be a fan of that, but also respect them.
Yeah.
And that other people do appreciate or value them. So there's no, like I said, I just feel like it's giving into that base instinct that you have, that weak instinct. And if you want to develop some mental toughness, start with being positive when you feel that urge to belittle someone else.
Yeah. Speaking of social media, right, there's this tendency, and it starts with TV too, with regular media and then social media, in that, going back to just the hunting world, and we see so-and-so killed a big buck, or so-and-so got this great thing. Or even just in life, so-and-so's business is doing so much better than mine, or so-and-so's whatever. And you start comparing yourselves to others. Mm-hmm. And this is something I've personally struggled with. Like, I find myself constantly comparing myself to others and feeling bad about myself because I'm not doing as good as X, or so-and-so did that. Why can't I do that? Why didn't I do that? What's wrong with me?
Right.
And it's something I'm aware of. I think step one is being aware of it. You can then make a change based on awareness. But it's like a natural thing that happens to me, and I think this affects a lot of people's like satisfaction with hunting. This impacts, how much you enjoy going out there. And when you start putting pressure on yourself, or looking at Facebook during November and feeling bad because this guy killed one, that guy killed one, why can't I?
Right.
How do you deal with that? Do you have those types of feelings sometimes? You feel?
I think people would be lying if they said they didn't.
Right.
In general, I think we all go through that. It's a good question. I feel like the way that I deal with it is I focus on gratitude.
Yeah.
Gratefulness. My wife went through cancer a few years ago, and it was a hard time for me. I, in fact, didn't handle it how I hoped I would. It was I wanted to be that mentally tough guy. And there were moments where I had breakdowns that I didn't see coming, that I didn't think I'd have. So I think that what I found was it's really tough when you actually sit back and you're like, I am so thankful for what I have and for who I've met and for my kids and my wife. And I'm so grateful for the health I have and the physical abilities I possess. And you go through that list. I may not be the richest guy, but hey, man, I love this truck.
Yeah.
I can afford that. You start going through, it sounds silly, but when you start going through all the stuff that you're grateful for, I think it's really difficult then to sit there and think about and dwell on all the things you don't have that someone else has that you don't have. And so I try every day to wake up and two things: be grateful, be truly grateful for everything, and also live for today.
Yeah.
Not for tomorrow, not for I'll be happy when, not for, as soon as I kill that elk, everything's good. No, today. Today was awesome.
Yeah.
Every day is awesome. And even days where I'm like, man, all I did was drive kids to school and drop them off and clean the house. And, it's like, it's not what I wanted. And yet it was a great day.
Yeah.
And I think when you start approaching life from that perspective, you stop doing the comparison thing. That's how I combat it. That's how I do it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, that's my antidote that I'm always trying to remind myself of too. It's like you can't be negative, and if you take every time you're feeling negative like that and replace it with gratitude, the two things can't coexist.
Yeah.
So if you
same
take
with
some
like
time,
fear and faith. I believe. Sometimes I'm sitting there and I'm like, is Gritty Bowmen like a waste of time?
Yeah.
Or is Gritty Bowmen really gonna go the distance? Am I making a difference? Am I adding value?
No.
And you start to have doubts. And I think it's very easy for us to focus on fears, right?
Oh yeah.
And am I creative enough? Is this film becoming what I want it to be?
Yep.
And when I focus on that, you're focusing on fear.
Yep.
But when I focus on, I believe I can do this. I believe that this is making a difference. I believe this is important for me. I believe that I can make a film or interview or do some stuff read a book and share that's going to make a difference.
Yep.
And when I focus on that and the faith and fear don't really go together.
Yeah.
A belief that you can do something or a fear that you can't, they're totally different.
It's like a shield almost. Like I feel like we're going to have negative things that are going to come at us. We are going to have fears that are going to come at us. And if you can learn to identify that and say, okay, here it comes. I know what's happening. I know what's going on in my head right now. And then okay, now I put that shield. I'm gonna believe. I'm going to be positive and grateful.
It sounds so cliche and cheesy.
And it's woo-woo.
But the truth is, that's what I think.
And it's this is life stuff. And then this is also some of the best hunting advice you're ever going to get, I think. Because if you can apply these mental tools, I suppose,
Yeah.
to what you're trying to achieve in the woods or in the mountains.
Dude, it goes back to, if you don't believe you're going to be able to kill a blacktail buck, on Saturday when you're heading out,
Yep.
then you're not going to descent your clothes the way you really should.
Yes.
You're not going to wear the rubber boots. You're not going to shoot your bow. There's all these things you're not going to do because you're like, it's not going to work anyway.
Yes, it's so mental.
And so when you have faith and you believe, then you do all these activities that lead to success.
Yep.
I think you have to combat fear with belief, and if you don't, it's self-fulfilling.
Yep.
Your failure it can happen. And the thing is again, it goes back to, so it didn't work out. I'm grateful that I spent a whole day in the wilderness, like taking in creation, right? Like taking in the world. It's
a pretty darn good day.
It's an amazing place. So it all goes back to success in the mountains or in the woods. It's the same.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
You I feel like we share a lot of similar reading interests.
Mm-hmm.
For people listening that want to learn a little bit more, just kind of engage in these types of discussions a little bit more with a book, do you have anything you'd recommend?
Yeah.
I'm guessing there's some of the same things that I would.
Yeah, I did a podcast on extreme ownership with that Jocko Willink wrote.
Yep.
And that's one of our highest downloaded podcasts of all time. And it's ironic because it's not a hunting podcast, really. I mean, it's a flat-out book review.
Right.
And we talk about the book. Now, it ties in. Corey Jacobson and I did it, and Jordan Harbertson at Mountain Ops. And it was great. And then we did another one called Ego is the Enemy.
Yeah.
And I feel like that book is so important in our time right now, where you can just say whatever you want on the internet, and people are kind of out of touch with reality. And it's very easy to just, I don't know, ego seems to just be a huge, I just see it everywhere I turn. And
our culture kind of cultivates this.
The book was very enlightening for a lot of people. I mean, it's funny, Corey Jacobson at Elk 101, he's like, Brian, I got halfway through the book, and the whole time I was thinking, man, this is just like my buddy so-and-so. Oh, man, this is just like so-and-so. He gets halfway through the book, and he's like, oh, my gosh, this book has been talking about me the whole time.
Yeah. That
was a huge eye-opener, and I think that you can't combat pride and ego if you don't really see it.
Yeah.
And so I think
Awareness.
that's a hugely important book. So we covered both of those, and that's why we did that. But the other books I really like, Jocko Willink just did a book review on Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
I haven't heard that one.
I've read that book at least 20 times.
Man's Searching for Meaning?
Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning.
And I kid you not, at least 20 times. It's a short read, but I have read it at least once a year for 20 years. And he is a Nazi concentration camp survivor, a Jewish Holocaust survivor. And he talks about Jocko approached it from a different angle than I've kind of ever thought. I thought about it in those terms, but, he's definitely approached it from a slightly different angle than me. It was a great podcast to hear him go over it, but that to me is a life-changing book. Then the other ones are like, when people ask me, how did you do Gritty Bowmen and blah, 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 well, a big part of that was, the Total Money Makeover with Dave Ramsey and Financial Peace University, getting out of debt and learning to manage my finances better and saving and planning.
Yeah.
And the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss.
Yeah.
That was huge. That's how I negotiated. Eventually, I was working from home 3 days a week and only going to the office 2, which that allowed me to do Gritty Bowmen on the side. So getting my finances in order, getting that career in order, and then chasing some dreams through 4-Hour Work Week. And then since then, I've read a lot of what Tim Ferriss has produced. And
good stuff.
So those are some of the big highlights for me that influenced, especially in recent times. But I have an Audible account, and I've had one since Audible launched, audiobook account.
Yeah.
And I get like 4 credits or 2 credits a month. I can't remember now. I get $2 a month basically for $20. So they're about $10 each. And then I buy an extra one here and there.
Yeah.
But I use my credits every month. I read or listen to on Audible 2 books a month. And now I've got hundreds of books in that inventory because it's been more than 10 years since I've done that. And so a lot of books out there, man, that are, I say, man, Dave Ramsey says you're the same person today that you are 20 years from now, except for the books you read and the people you meet.
Yeah. I like Ryan Holiday, who wrote The Ego is the Enemy. He's kind of enabled me in a bad way, maybe, but it's a good way. But I tell my wife, and she shakes her head because he always talks about that a book is a purchase that is never the wrong purchase, because you are giving yourself the opportunity to walk in someone else's shoes, or to open the door into a different world, to see the world in a different way, to learn something. And every time you have an opportunity to learn something, that's worth any dollar amount.
I agree.
And I think just always learning, exploring these things. Another one he wrote, did you read The Obstacle is the Way?
Yeah, I actually posted that on Instagram 2 days ago. That was the one we started what we call a Gritty Book Club.
I've seen that,
and
I'd love to be in your book club.
We should.
Can I be in your book club?
Yes.
Nobody else ever reads these books with me.
Randy Newberg's in it now. He wants to join. We're gonna do a couple books on conservation.
Nice.
Where he's read a ton of those books, and I'm like, I'm deficient in this space, so we're gonna read it and then talk about it. But the Gritty Book Club is just we read a book, me and a friend or a couple of friends, and then we do a podcast about it. And it's sort of just not really the core podcast, but I love the idea of exposing people to, we can talk about it for an hour, right? Hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it is. But when you sit down with that book in your own, and you read, a book that takes 25 hours to get through, it's way more than I could tell you in 2 hours.
Oh yeah.
And written in such a way that someone put their heart and soul into it. And I think that's really life-changing stuff. So I like to do it. So Obstacle is the Way is the next one that Corey and we finished reading it. Jordan and I are on it for our second time, so we're supposed to get together and discuss that one. But that one is really good.
Speaks to a lot of things we've been talking about here the last 20, 30 minutes.
Tell me, what's your favorite fiction book?
Favorite fiction book?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm a nerd. So you know this.
I know.
You know where I'm going with this.
I love it. I love it, dude.
I love The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings.
Every now and then I got to send you a text or make fun of Jordan Harbison.
Dude, Jordan knows what's up.
Yeah,
he knows what's up. Dude, Gandalf, the wisdom, but it's a little nerdy, wizards and elves and everything, but it's the hero's tale that we all live in some weird way where you.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, and there really is wisdom in there, and I know that might seem weird, but to read that book and there is wisdom and there are lessons learned
and creativity.
And it's pretty cool in a weird way.
I agree. I ask nonfiction because I think that it's hugely impactful as well.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Harry Potter.
Yeah, me too.
I loved Harry Potter. I've read those a couple of times. I'd love to read it with my kids, and I think those stretch yourself too. So it's not all about nonfiction.
Yeah. I just love to read. So, but
you did work for Google.
I did work for Google.
You are one of those educated types.
Well, I don't know about that.
College kids.
I always thought that I somehow slipped through the cracks when I was working there. I was always waiting for someone to walk up and tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here." We don't know how this happened, but somehow I made it through.
Yeah.
But we're getting kicked out of our little outdoor studio here.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to shut it down. But
dude,
Brian,
thank you. I just want to say thanks for having me on the podcast. It's pretty neat. I've been a big fan of all your work and what you've done for a long time. I mean, you were the first person that did a podcast in the outdoor industry that I reached out to, and I really appreciate what you do, and I'm glad I got to be on your show.
Well, ditto, right back at you. It's been really cool to see what you've been able to do and the positive difference you're making. And if anyone's not already checking out the Gritty Bowmen, You guys are doing great work. You should check it out, subscribe, listen, and they can find that anywhere they can find the Wired Hunt podcast, right?
Yep. iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher,
Yep.
YouTube. That's one thing that is a little different. Like, I've done video episodes since we
Right.
started.
That's
so
nice.
in general, most people just listen, but the video is out there for some folks.
Yep, which is cool.
If I have an attractive guest, the viewing goes up.
Yeah, I
like,
can see that.
It's
That's a
like
good thing.
It's kind of funny. There's a pretty girl on the podcast, and then all of a sudden, my views triple.
Yeah. Well, I've always wanted to be a video mine, but I live in country, back of the woods, Corn Belt, and my internet is so bad I can't even upload video, let alone stream.
Yeah, I'm having that problem too in Evergreen, just in the little pocket where we're at. I end up going to the coffee shop a lot more than I thought I would.
That's what I have to do a lot too.
Yeah.
And then I pay for ridiculously expensive data plans from Verizon and use that. But
and you get a latte.
Yes, yeah. So great time with this.
Yeah,
Brian.
man.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Let's talk more.
All right.
And that's going to be it. Thanks for sticking around for what I believe has been our longest podcast yet. But I hope you enjoyed, especially what we got to here towards the end. This topic of the mental side of hunting and life, I think is very, very important. It's something we typically don't think about, but it really can have a significant impact on your life when you start being mindful of that. So hope you enjoyed it. I just want to give you another reminder, like I talked about at the top here. We're doing the live podcast next week, July 21st, down in New Orleans at the Quality Deer Management Association National Convention. We'd love to see you guys there, so be sure to check that out, 9:45 a.m. at the convention on July 21st, and then 8 p.m. that night, we're going to do a Wired to Hunt meetup. That'd be awesome to see you there as well. So that's all from me. Thank you for listening. Big thanks to our partners at Sitka Gear, Yeti Coolers, Matthews Archery, Maven Optics, the Whitetail Institute of North America, Trophy Ridge, and Huntera Maps. And of course, thank you all so much for listening. I hope you have an amazing day, an amazing week. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.